Hey, what's up, everybody? We're live on the ThunderQuack Network podcast, or Spoilercast, I should say, for Rogue One. Yes, another year and another Star Wars movie is upon us. So, my name is Tim Gerasi from The Saga Continues. I'm going to be your host for this episode, and joining me is my co-host from The Saga Continues, Kyle. What's up, Kyle?
How's it going, everybody? Glad to finally get to talk some Rogue One after, obviously, Tim, you and I have been building up to this for months and months, and so finally get to
I
see what
know.
you think.
Been itching to talk about it since we're pretty much walked out of the theater. I think it's safe to say.
Oh, yeah.
And joining us for this roundtable discussion is Joey Letton from the wonderful Annie Minicast, which I got to say, Joey, 1 hour of waiting in line last night. So,
oh, fantastic! What a weird way to get through line of course is listening to a podcast about the Animaniacs. Yeah, but yeah, that's awesome. Thanks.
That night, so.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining us.
That one is part of it.
Yeah, Joey, thanks for being able to join us as our special guest, because we had a couple other members from our ThunderQuack network that were supposed to be on here, but decided that it was more important to go see Rogue One a second time. So how dare they? Like,
yeah, can't say I blame them. You know, this is fun, but you know, this is great.
I'm like, that's where I would be right now if I weren't doing this. But
yeah, so let's get into it. I mean,
all right.
This is a spoiler cast, but I'm going to throw it out there once. We're going to talk about everything from Rogue One, all the big moments, reveals, Easter eggs, everything. So the spoiler warning is out there. But I guess to start off with our discussion, just kind of our general impressions of what we felt immediately after the movie was over. So, Joey, since you're our special guest, I'll go ahead and throw it over to you first. What did you think as soon as the credits stopped rolling?
As soon as the credits started rolling, I immediately yelled out, "Let's go see A New Hope!" because I was pumped. I was like, "Let's go!" You know, I just, oh man, it was exhilarating. My expectations were, you know, I think they were pretty much in check. They started kind of low, you know, like I didn't really know what to expect, and then people were going, "Oh my gosh, it's so great!" And I was like, "Okay, keep it in check, Joey." But at the end, I was very pleased with the movie, and I had a lot of fun. And for you know, especially for a movie that, I mean, let's face it, almost everybody in that poster died, other than Vader. I mean, every single character on that poster is no longer with us. But that's bold and that's different, and it was a great movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't. Joey, what were my initial thoughts? Because all I remember is, like, as soon as the credits started rolling, I leaned over to say something to you guys. Oh, no, you know what I think it was? I was pointing out the fact that Tim, I think on some of our previous episodes of The Saga Continues talking about this, they ended it basically like exactly the way that I had been hoping for.
Oh, yeah.
Predicting. Mm-hmm. And not that I was trying to be all boastful and be like, oh, I knew how it was going to end. Like, I was just excited. Like, that's how I wanted to see it end, and that's exactly what they did with the Tantive 4 taking off, with Leia getting the Death Star plans, and it's like you could cut the opening crawl off the beginning of A New Hope and just edit these two movies together back to back, and it would almost be like one 4-hour-long movie of, you know, just one continuous story.
So true.
That's exactly what Kyle was saying. We walked out of the theater. It's like, I knew it. Did you listen to that episode? That's exactly what I said.
Yeah. Now, what I didn't predict or see coming was the Vader scene that immediately preceded that. And, well, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Yeah. Tim, what'd you think?
Yeah. So for me, I had a feeling I never had before after watching a Star Wars movie for the first time. Once Rogue One ended and the credits were rolling, it just had a buzz that never had before at the end of a Star Wars movie, and it was awesome for the reasons you described, Kyle, and as you alluded to, the stuff with Vader, which we'll get into later on. But here in my theater too was just such an uproar. The cheering lasted so long during the credits when they were rolling, a lot longer than they usually do for, you know, when movies are over and it's good, audience applauds it. But this one went on for a long time. You just hear people behind me just talk like, oh man, that was amazing. Like, wow. There's a great energy and vibe in the theater once it was over. So it was great. And overall for the movie, I really, really enjoyed it. There's some stuff about it that nitpicking at me since it was over and still today that I'm kind of hoping maybe on the second viewings or more times I see it, they'll go away. But uh, it was still really good. It was what it's supposed to be, a standalone side story in the Star Wars universe that felt different from the saga films, but at the same time too, still felt like you were watching Star Wars. So I think they definitely succeeded in what they were wanting to do with Rogue One, as far as it being connected to the overall Star Wars saga, but yet, having its own unique feel and its separate story that gives you introduction to new characters, new planets, and all that. So overall, I thought it was a big success.
Yeah, definitely. And I realized I didn't even give my overall impressions. I just talked about the ending. But I would kind of agree with you where, I mean, I don't think this is like my new favorite Star Wars movie, but it was very enjoyable. And like I said, I think they definitely succeeded at what they were trying to do, as far as establishing, the first and what's going to be a whole line of spin-off films, and trying something a little different, having something that has a different feel and tone than the main saga films, but also still feels like Star Wars. And especially, I mean, that was really important for this one being so close to A New Hope. Like, they couldn't make it so different that you couldn't see A New Hope taking place right after this. And I think they totally nailed that. So yeah, I mean, I had some little nitpicks and things too that we can talk about, but the good far outweighed the bad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How about you, Joey? As far as the movie as a whole, what did you take away from it?
As a whole, I mean, I was thinking about, right immediately when we left, we were like, okay, where does this rank? It was immediately talking about
That's
that.
Impossible for me to do right there.
I know. And really, and today I was thinking like, I think I put it right in the middle of this and that. But the more I've been thinking about it this evening, I was thinking, you know what? It's as much as I want to rank these with saga films, I really think I'm going to have two separate rankings in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think I'm more comfortable with, I'm going to rank saga films, they have the numbers, and then I'm going to do these standalone films as a separate kind of being, because it was a Star Wars film, but it was different. It was something new, and I liked it. What can I say? Overall impressions were, I loved what I saw, and I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to see this one repeatedly. I was like, I knew I wanted to see it at least twice, but I think it's definitely going to be one of these films where it's, I don't know if I'll see it as much as I did The Force Awakens, but I'm definitely going to see it more than just twice. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I definitely agree that I think this is, at least for me too, like, this is going to have to go on its own separate list. As far as, comparing, I mean, some people are saying, oh, this is my new favorite Star Wars film since Empire, or, at least even comparing whether or not they liked it more than The Force Awakens. And I mean, for me, I need to go see it again, because I can never make a definite decision on that right after I see it for the first time. But also, it's like, as much as I enjoy the action and the rebel espionage and all that kind of stuff that was going on here, it's like, can you really put that up against Anakin and Luke and Obi-Wan and, what really is the core of the Star Wars saga? But that's not to say I would put it at the bottom of the list either. So, it's just, it's like trying to rank the movies against, comparing like a favorite Clone Wars or Rebels episode to it. And I've heard a lot of people say they think that there are certain episodes of the Clone Wars that are better than episodes 1 and 2 and things like that. And I mean, I'm not saying they're wrong either, because I mean, there have been some really enjoyable moments in there, but still, to compare a half-hour episode of an animated show to a 2-hour movie, and knowing that the animated show owes its whole existence in the first place to those movies, it's just kind of like comparing apples and oranges.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally glad you brought that up, Kyle, because I was thinking the same thing, where ranking Rogue One for me is like ranking an awesome Clone Wars arc with the movies, because there are some arcs in the Clone Wars that I think are up there with the movies, and some of them I enjoy better than some of the movies, like Umbara or Mortis. But I don't know exactly where I place them, but because they're very different. I think this is kind of similar to Rogue One, and I'm kind of curious too, where just there's definitely been a positive reaction to the movie in general, but I'm not sure. I don't think it's going to be as massive as The Force Awakens was, because like you brought up earlier, Joey, it does end kind of on a bummer note. If you're really invested in those characters, it doesn't have that really feel good the feeling you got afterwards, The Force Awakens. And yeah, you can argue where having Han Solo die, you probably wouldn't feel too good about that when you left. But there's that sense of vested with these new characters of the journey that Rey's going to set off on. And all these ones in Rogue One, this is it for them. So, but the stuff that gets you pumped up is just as a diehard Star Wars fan is the Vader stuff. So it's going to be interesting to see what the general reaction to the movie is going to be, and how they view it, how they react to it firsthand, and what they would think about a multiple viewing. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out in the years to come.
Totally.
But I guess to get into some specific stuff, let's go ahead and start with some of the hero characters and some of our favorite we got in this movie, is which one stood out to us and thought had the best story arc. So, and if those who are watching live, if you want to chime in on the chat, let us know who your favorite hero character for right now is, and we'll be sure to bring it up. So, Kyle, I'll throw it to you first. Who is your favorite amongst the group of rebels as our heroes?
Ooh, let's see. I mean, I feel like everybody's going to say this, but it's got to kind of be a toss-up between Chirrut and K2SO, which I kind of knew going into, like, those were the two characters I was most excited about seeing, because they're two, maybe not two completely new characters, but two new and unique kind of spins on a classic Star Wars archetype. Because obviously with Chirrut, you've got the spiritual warrior who's connected to the Force and the Jedi and that mythology and everything, but here, instead of him actually being a Jedi, he's just a blind warrior monk who they mention him being the guardian of this temple that the Empire is taking kyber crystals from. And I thought it was interesting, they never actually really, I mean, they've said in interviews and stuff that there are no Jedi in this movie, or any of that kind of stuff, but the movie itself leaves it kind of ambiguous, I felt like, as to whether or not Chirrut can actually use the Force or like sense it or feel it to any degree, or if he's just like a devout believer in it. I mean, obviously he wasn't like Force pushing people around, so he doesn't have like the full Force potential, but I mean, I went into it thinking like, oh, he's just going to be a guy who doesn't have Force powers at all, but just believes that it's there. But then there were certain points in the movie where I'm like, is he kind of tapping into it a little bit, or is the Force itself like actively protecting him because he's sort of a guardian or a believer of it? So that was very interesting, and obviously he had a lot of cool action moments, and as much as I was looking forward to the comic relief from K2SO, I thought Chirrut actually had the funniest moment of the movie, where where the rebels all get captured and by Saw Gerrera's like henchmen, and they're getting taken to his base, and they like put bags over all their heads to keep them from seeing where they're going. And obviously Chirrut's blind, and they still go ahead and throw a sack over his head, and he's just, as they're dragging him off screen, he just goes, "Are you kidding me?"
Oh yeah, that got the biggest laugh in my theater.
I was laughing for what felt like a couple minutes afterwards, after they'd already moved on. I was like, wow, that was amazing.
Yeah.
How about you, Joey?
Well, first of all, I gotta say, Kyle, I think he's definitely Force sensitive, because I mean, you can't be Force sensitive without going, hey, you got a kyber crystal all around your neck, without looking at it. It's all covered up. I think from the minute you see him, you're supposed to think like, this guy's a Force sensitive guy, because she goes, "Are you a Jedi?" And he's like, "Oh no, I'm not a Jedi." So, but he is definitely Force sensitive, and I think he's not even really quite sure. He like there's that moment where when he's saying I am with the Force is with me, and he's doing that chant as he's bullets are flying everywhere. I really sensed a moment of like almost like he wasn't quite sure if this was going to work, or he was but he just trusted in the Force that it would protect him and that he would be okay. And I just so he definitely has a sensitivity to it. But I guess really. I guess really when it comes to just the characters that really stood up for me, obviously Chirrut, for many of those reasons, was just a standout character. Before the movie came out, I bought a K2SO Black Series figure just because I loved the design of him, and just from the little bits that we got of him, of just being a really kind of funny character, and I always like the funny robots.
Mhm.
Uh, I really while he wasn't my favorite character, I was very pleasantly surprised with Cassian Andor's, or not Andor's, Andor, whatever. His character, because he was an incredibly complex character. I mean, the whole idea of the shades of gray were definitely in his approach to things, and my mouth dropped when he first shot that spy. And that was something I never thought that would happen in this. When I heard some early reviews saying, "Oh, there's shades of gray in this," and I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'm sure there is with Saw Gerrera, I'm sure." And then to see Cassian, who I just assumed was just the perfect good guy, rebellion guy, to do that. That was something different. I really liked the plot progression where him and Jin have to come to a trust. That was an ongoing theme that I appreciated. Really, I mean, all the characters. I mean, they all had their moments, and I was very impressed because just through the trailers alone, I wasn't really expecting much from those characters. Jin, kind of looked a little bit boring to me when in the trailers, but she was a very nice. She did get emotional at times, and it was a really fun character to watch as well. And the interaction between Baze and Chirrut was hilarious. It was just great stuff all around. Loved every character, even the bad guys.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and that's something that I've been hearing a lot of people say is that, or at least I've heard some people say they think that like this is the best cast in a Star Wars movie, or just sort of the best all around like performances from everybody. And again, I'll kind of have to, I got to see it multiple times before I can say like, oh, it was the best one of this or the best one of this or whatever. But because I wasn't really paying attention to like, oh, how good are these performances? I was just drawn into the story, but I mean, definitely nothing stood out to me as like, oh, this person's kind of stiff or doesn't play this character the way I would have expected. Like, I thought all the performances were really good. All the characters were really enjoyable. So yeah, I mean, it kind of is hard to pick a favorite because also, yeah, like you said, Joey, Jin and Cassian were both really good. And I like Jin's progression as kind of like almost the Han Solo reluctant hero type a little bit in a way. I mean, she obviously had a much more emotional story than Han did, at least, in A New Hope. Force Awakens, maybe different story, but just sort of her progression from, the criminal to like the rebel recruit. And then once they get to Jeddah and they meet with Saw Gerrera, like at that point, she's still thinking, I brought you guys to Saw, you get to meet with him, peace out. Like, that's what you brought me here for. That's it. I'm done. I don't want anything to do with, your noble hero, good guy rebellion. I just want my life back and to not be an Imperial prisoner. And this was the deal. So I'm going to take it. And then it's not till she sees the message from her father telling her about the Death Star plans and, what he's really been up to for the past 15 years and all this kind of stuff that it really strikes an emotional chord with her. And she's like, okay, fine. Like, I got to finish what my dad started now. So,
yeah.
I agree with you, Joey, as far as what you said about Cassian. Out of the main hero group of rebels, he was my favorite and had the most compelling story arc I felt throughout the whole movie. And I totally agree with what you said, where when they were having those press junkets and they showed the first 25 minutes of the film and they said, some of the choices Cassian makes in this will surprise you. And I was wondering what that was. And then, when he shot that informant, giving him that information, that really took me by surprise. Like, oh wow, they're not messing around here, and that's what I really loved. Or one of my favorite things about Rogue One is how it showed the rebellion as not just being, the perfect good guys here to topple the evil empire. They have their dark and dirty moments too, and they displayed that here with Cassian. And I just loved how too part of his main mission wasn't to steal the Death Star plans with Jin; it was to kill her father. That took me by surprise, and that was the story aspect that came about. And then just seeing him struggle with that as he knows that's what he has to do, and not looking Jin in the eye on certain things about what their mission is, and when he goes out to complete that mission, how he just struggles with it and eventually doesn't pull that trigger. And then my favorite culmination of it is at the very end, or not the very end, but when leading up to the Battle of Scarif, where he brings that small band of rebel soldiers to Jin and says, we're gonna be with you and to finish this fight, because of all the shady and dark stuff I've done, what is the point of that if we just give up now? Anything about it, like, we can't let all that be for nothing. So I just loved his progression throughout the course of the story. And then, I kind of figured he wasn't dead when Krennic shot him off the beam there and he fell down. I kind of figured he'd come back some way to probably stop Krennic. So that wasn't a huge surprise, but it was still a pretty cool moment to have her save Jin, or to have him save Jin, and then, the two of them to have that final moment together. So he was my favorite character, but you guys were right. Each one of them was great. They had their own moments that allowed them to shine, and even Bodhi Rook too. I wasn't expecting too much from him as far as a character I'd be too invested in, but he had an engaging backstory too, as far as being an Imperial pilot who defective by Galen Erso. We knew he was a defective Imperial pilot, but the reasoning why was still, at least for me, was a mystery, and getting that it was to Galen Erso was the one who sent them out there to meet Saw Gerrera. So all these cool little links between the characters that worked out really well. So but out of all of them, Cassian was the one I got engaged with the most.
And Bodhi was kind of a nice surprise for me too, because I mean, just the way they introduced him as part of sort of the main cast of, the crew of Rogue One, if you will. I thought he was going to be part of the team from the start, and just that his backstory was going to be that he was, this the former Imperial pilot who had defected to the rebellion. So the fact that he actually is sort of not with the Empire, but at the beginning of the movie is, has just freshly defected, and he's, looking for Saw Gerrera with this message from Galen Erso, and hasn't met up with the main cast of characters yet. It was like, oh, so this is what his, role in the movie is. And it wasn't just to sort of be the pilot for the team, but that he actually, kind of had a bigger part to play and the message to deliver and everything. So that was cool. And then I didn't actually talk about K2SO all that much either. Like, he was, I loved his sort of twist on, I mean, there are some moments where he's obviously like the C-3PO type character, but he's C-3PO, but he's not C-3PO. And it didn't feel like, oh, they're just trying to copy C-3PO and, make him more mean or sarcastic or whatever. But it was like, I don't know. I love the way they executed that character. I mean, plus I thought his voice was great. The motion capture and the animation and everything was awesome, because he just looked like a droid sitting there. And then, he finally gets his action moment with a blaster at the end, which, I was kind of sad that he was the first one that died and, went out in a blaze of glory fighting all those stormtroopers. I'm like, you put a blaster in his hand. I mean, obviously he's this big, bulky Imperial droid who looks like he can shrug off more than one hit. So, that it was cool to see that aspect of him as well. But just, hearing all those little snarky lines and stuff, I kind of love that he basically just like has no filter. Like, he's supposed to be Cassian's right-hand man. You would think if he knows that Cassian is going to go assassinate Galen Erso, he would be supposed to like keep that a secret. And I don't think he knew specifically what Cassian was up to, but he was the one who mentioned, like, as Jin is sitting around and, they're kind of thinking, maybe Cassian's up to something. And I think Chirrut mentioned something about, the force flows differently around a person who's about to kill or something. And, but he was saying like, no, he has the face of a friend. Like, I think we can trust him. And K2SO just blurts out in the middle, well, his rifle was set for sniper mode. And Jin's like, oh crap. Well, I better go stop him then.
Yeah.
I'm like, I hope nobody told Cassian that K2 spilled the beans on him there.
I love the animation in K2's eyes. Those eyes just gave him that little bit of life, because it's, there's no mouth. His mouth plate moved a little bit from time to time, but those eyes really, I mean, they did a fantastic job of just getting subtle movements in there that really kind of brought some life to his face, which was neat to see as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think the only thing I was disappointed by with him was that they released a clip online of one of his early scenes, and it was, he had a couple of lines in there that were hilarious, and I was thinking, oh man, if this is what we can look forward to, this is going to be like my favorite character in the movie. But as it turned out, like I thought those are kind of what ended up being his funniest moment. And he definitely had a lot of other moments that, you know, kind of got a laugh out of me, but nothing that, you know, I thought quite reached that level. And it's when he's in the ship with Jin and Cassian for the first time. And he's like telling Cassian that Jin's got a blaster, and Cassian goes back to her. He's like, "Where'd you find that?" And she's like, "I found it." And he's like, "I find that ounce of vague and unconvincing." And then, you know, she convinces Cassian to trust her, and he goes back up to the cockpit, and he's like, "Well, you're letting her keep it. Would you like to know the probability of her using it against you?" Starts powering up the ship. It's high. It's very high. I love his like deadpan delivery. The fact that he doesn't even look at him. He's like, you know, Cassian doesn't say, "Yes, I want to know the odds," but he's like, "I'm going to tell you anyways because it's high."
Yeah, I agree. That is probably the rare moment for something in one of these Star Wars movies where if you're excited for a character like K2SO, where they did kind of show the best moments in, whether it's a trailer, TV spot, or even some of the clips that didn't quite have later on in the movie. But like you said, he had a great, you know, blaze of glory moment when he's taking out all the stormtroopers, but it just couldn't take them all out. But I know all of us on this roundtable are Clone Wars fans. So what do you guys think of how Saw Gerrera was portrayed in the movie?
Joey, you want to go first? You want me to
he was a bigger jerk. He was a bigger jerk than he was in the Clone Wars. I never really liked the character Saw the first time around. I thought he was kind of a pompous kind of guy, kind of full of himself and, you know, protective of his sister, which is fine and all. But he was kind of a jerk back then, but just kind of a different kind of jerk. This one, you know, I was a little disappointed that I didn't like Saw more than I thought I would. Which I guess is a good thing because you're not necessarily supposed to like Saw in this movie that much, because you know he's basically torturing, you know, Bodhi at one point with that weird tentacle thingamabobber. But I thought his portrayal was very interesting. I was a little disappointed he died. I mean, I wanted to see him. I don't know, just to have a little bit more action in the movie, but it was cool. It was cool. I liked that he had that kind of history behind him, and it made total logical sense that he would continue to be a radical, you know, since his character was introduced, and you know they kept mentioning the word terrorist in the original arc on the Clone Wars. To describe him, and so I thought that was still in play very much for his portrayal in this movie.
Yeah, I kind of agree that like I was hoping he would get more action at first, but then the more I thought about it, I was like, you know, that's maybe what I was expecting, having seen him have a lot of action moments on Clone Wars in the arc that he was in, but that's clearly not just like that's not the role they intended for him here. He's got all his recruits now, you know, his followers, if you will, that are out in the streets, you know, just attacking Imperial patrols and stuff.
And how cool was that one guy with the black scout helmet on?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, he obviously at this point is at the point in his life where A, you know, he's not as young as he once was, and B, you know, has clearly been through a lot of battles, a lot of physical trauma and emotional trauma, you know, which we know from Clone Wars, like he lost his sister, you know, fairly early on in his life. And so, you know, maybe just knowing some of the history there, I mean, I could almost kind of see just like the pain and the years worn away on his face, you know, like, so I thought, you know, it was a good portrayal. And I kind of had to just like adjust my expectations once I saw him. Cause at first I was like, yeah, you know, I would have loved to see him get into battle with some stormtroopers or something. But then, you know, when you see him like walking with a cane and a metal leg and, you know, a breathing mask that he's got clipped to his chest plate, it's like he still wears battle armor, but he's clearly not at the point in his life where he's going to be on the front lines of a battle and do anybody any good. So.
Yeah, well, let's be honest. I mean, I think it was kind of obvious to me, at least when they were initially getting his character, he probably wasn't always going to be Saw Gerrera. You know, I really get the feeling that when he was originally written, he was going to be this, you know, radical guy who's half machine, and they're trying to pull up the whole like he's kind of like Vader kind of thing going on. And I'm sure it wasn't until the story team like Pablo said, hey, we kind of have a character like that already. Let's go ahead and make it Saw Gerrera. So it kind of, keeping that in mind, it makes sense to me that it's not exactly the Saw Gerrera that we originally saw, just because I don't think he was originally intended to be Saw Gerrera. So
yeah, but you know what? Honestly, I think that made him work. Maybe not a lot better, but I think that helped the character actually, just giving him that history and that backstory. Because Saw was never, the most interesting character on Clone Wars. He wasn't a main character or anything like that. So it's not like we came into it with a bunch of huge expectations.
That's true.
If it had been Ahsoka or Darth Maul or something like that, then obviously we'd, have all these huge expectations of what they're going to be like and how they're going to be portrayed and what kind of scene, what their role in the story is going to be and action scenes and all that kind of stuff. Whereas with Saw, I was like, it would have been cool to see him in a battle or something, but whatever his role in the story ends up being, it's just cool to see a character make that transition from, the animated world over, onto the big screen like that. And even though it wasn't, a direct, like you said, it seemed a little different, whether it was because he wasn't always intended to be that way or whether they just decided to change some things. Like he didn't look exactly like him. I think in Clone Wars, like Saw had different colored eyes, like his eyes were like light blue or something like that. And he definitely seemed older than what Saw would be, because I don't know how old he was supposed to be on Clone Wars, but I always took him and his sister to be maybe like mid-20s at the earliest.
30s at the oldest.
Yeah, or at the oldest. I mean, and I think Saw was supposed to be the older one, so him maybe like 30 at the oldest.
He's had a hard life, Kyle.
But he has, and I was going to say, like, that definitely seemed plausible, especially in the Star Wars universe. I mean, look at Obi-Wan Kenobi. We already know that the 19 years between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope just have a tendency of wearing on people faster than, making them age faster than you'd expect. So
exactly. And he had cybernetic. Oh, yeah, especially on Tatooine with the sun damage. We know that in Arizona. But and he just had a cybernetic eyes. That's why his eyes were different color. So there you go.
There you go. Yep. See, there's an explanation for everything in the Star Wars universe. And for me, I enjoyed Forrest Whitaker's portrayal as Saw, but I couldn't help but that we didn't get a lot of, well, I shouldn't say a lot, but at least a few references to his past in the Clone Wars. That's kind of what I was looking for. You got the first character who was in the animated series being brought into a live action film. It would have been cool if they made just one or two references to his time during the Clone Wars. And I know there's stuff which I'll get into probably a lot more later on, but from the trailer that was cut in the actual movie when it was in the flashback or the opening prologue where he's talking to Jin, where he has the bald head and he's saying, "What would you do if they catch you? What would you do if they break you?" I felt that could have been a. So there's more stuff with Saw. I don't know if maybe he did reference some stuff in the Clone Wars, but in that, and they just didn't make the film. But it could have been a cool little, nod just to tell her, I know what I'm doing. I've been doing this since the Clone Wars, or I trained with Jedi or clones or something to that effect, just to give you or give us the diehard fans that little cool reference and nod to his series and his history, because that's a big appeal of having him in this movie, is knowing his history and all that. So I was a little disappointed on that front, but I won't say his character could have just been any new character. It didn't have to be Saw Gerrera, because what we learned later on about Saw, like in Rebels and in the novel Bloodline, where how his his rebel cell was really extreme and they took things a little too far. He gained a reputation for that. And I thought the movie showed that perfectly. Like you said, Joey, how he tortured Bodhi and then the attack they made on the Imperial troops. So I did feel it lived up to the reputation and legacy we already knew of Saw Gerrera from some of the other stuff. So overall, it was cool to have him in there, but just couldn't help be a little disappointed not to get any Clone Wars references in there. It just felt like a missed opportunity.
Yeah. I feel like that could have been a little gratuitous, though, because, I mean, as much as there was like a lot of fan service and, sort of Easter eggs and little references and stuff in this movie, it did all kind of tie into this story and this time period. And, there were no cameos of characters that we don't see again until Return of the Jedi or The Force Awakens or anything like that, except for Mon Mothma, but that wasn't a cameo. She was actually kind of a major player. And And so, you know, as much as I would have, I mean, you know, the fanboy in me would have loved to have Saw, you know, just casually name drop like Ahsoka or Rex or something like that. Like it would have kind of felt out of place. Like, okay, cool. Like he was part of the Clone Wars and they're throwing something in there for Clone Wars fans. But what does that actually have to do with what's going on now in the story?
Yeah.
But also, I mean, I did feel like as far as, you know, him being a jerk or going to extremes or whatever, like I thought that was kind of fitting. And in a way, this might sound kind of weird, but it was almost like it kind of reminded me a little bit of like when Luke meets Yoda for the first time in The Empire Strikes Back, where it's just like sort of this old mentor character that's got like this legend built up around them, and then you get there and they're not quite what you expect. Obviously with Saw, it's a, you know, in a totally different direction, where Yoda's just gone a little loopy being in the swamp by himself, and you know, but Saw, they go to thinking they're going to get help, and he ends up, you know, imprisoning them, and doesn't even trust Jin at first when she's, you know, trying to tell him that Bodhi brought a message from her father, and he's like, no, it must be a trap, and, you know, they're always sending spies and all this kind of stuff. Like on the one hand, it's like, you know, calm down, dude, like why are you being such a jerk to her? But I totally get it. Like I thought his portrayal, you know, perfectly captured just the fact that this guy has been around a long time. He's been fighting the Empire longer than most of the other people in the rebellion, and has just seen a lot, been through a lot. And so they may look at him as an extremist and think that, you know, he goes too far and not agree with all of his views, but like he's got a reason for it. You know, he's not just some crazy dude who wants to kill people or wants to take things too far. Like he has been through enough to know, like, okay, well, I've survived this long. This is what I've got to do, and I'm going to keep doing my thing. So
yeah.
I thought he was a pretty interesting character for the short amount of time that he had.
Can we maybe get some comics about, you know, Saw in Jin's early days, like after he takes her under his wing and he trains her? That would be really cool to see.
I'm sure we will at some point.
Yeah.
And I'll buy them.
Oh, of course, yeah. But before we leave the topic of the hero characters, this is something that we've talked about on our show just in casual conversations, Kyle, but who was going to live and who was going to die amongst this group? Were you guys surprised that there were no survivors amongst this group? Because it definitely took me by surprise. And once they start all going down one by one, I'm like, oh shoot, no one's getting out of this. And, you know, you're just waiting for what's going to happen to Jin and Cassian. So that took me by surprise. But at the same time, I felt it was kind of something that was necessary, because I've said this before too, where if they were such an important part of stealing the Death Star plans, you'd think they'd be involved some way in the actual Death Star attack and just later on with the rebellion. So, but why weren't they there? So it did kind of make sense that they weren't, that none of them did survive. But at the same time, kind of got to give Lucasfilm the props to going all the way and not having any of the main characters survive this movie. So it was a pretty gutsy move, but I think for the story, it worked out best. But did that surprise you guys at all?
I kept going back to Vader's line of, you know, I've tracked the rebel spies to her. Now she's my only link to, you know, that blah, blah, blah. So the only link is, well, there you go. You know, he going right to Leia. So there was a split second where I thought, you know, maybe Jin might be able to get off that planet. But then it was quickly, you know, it became clear to me that, yeah, that's definitely not going to happen. But I will say this about their deaths. Each and every, I thought that each one got a hero's death, and they made it very clear in all of those, in that final battle scene, that without each and every one of those heroes doing what they did, they wouldn't be successful.
Yeah.
If you took out any one of those pieces, they wouldn't have gotten it done. So that was really cool to see.
Yeah, definitely. I wasn't really surprised. I wasn't, you know, I thought it could have been possible, like you said, that maybe one or two people could have survived. And yeah, Tim, we've, you know, speculated about that a lot, but it was always also in the back of my mind, like, well, maybe none of them will survive. And yeah, I totally agree with you, Joey. Like there was nobody that felt like they kind of just got offed really quickly and discarded. You know, even Saw Gerrera, when he dies like halfway through the movie, like he totally could have gotten on that ship with them and taken off, but it kind of just felt like you know, like a captain going down with his ship, like that sort of thing. Like, you know, he was on this planet, his guys in the city obviously had already been wiped out. You know, he sees the destruction from the Death Star heading towards him, and you know, he says something like, "No, I'm done running," but obviously he's barely holding together at this point anyways. He's got, you know, a metal leg, he needs like a breathing tube, and you know, doesn't get along with the other rebels. So even if he survived and came back with them, it's not like he's going to suddenly fit right in and be best pals with everybody in the rebellion. Like, you know, so it didn't really, I guess what I'm saying with him is like, he could have survived, but it didn't feel like a dumb decision on his part, or just, you know, like they needlessly killed off the character by having him say like, no, I'm just gonna take my final stand and look death in the eye. Like, it felt kind of fitting for the character, because, you know, seeing his mistrust of Jin and the way that he's, you know, treating the other people and stuff, it's like, clearly, again, like I said, he's seen enough and been through enough at this point that, you know, he's like, okay, time to let somebody else carry on this fight. So yeah, that was good. And then yeah, you know, the way that, I mean, I think K2 might have had my favorite death, just because of the way that, you know, he, like I said, just took it like a champ and just went down fighting in a blaze of glory. But also, you know, I mean, Chirrut was also, you know, one of the better ones. That was the moment, like I said, where even if he wasn't, you know, as he just holds his staff out in front of him and just starts chanting, you know, I am with the Force and the Force is with me, and just walks through, you know, a hail of blaster fire from these death troopers. And that's where I was thinking, okay, even if this guy can't use the Force, I wonder if he's sort of tapping into it somehow, or if just, you know, like the living Force is like surrounding and protecting him right now, because we've already seen these death troopers, like, I mean, they're crack shots. And we can probably talk about them more when we get to the Empire, Tim, but I hope you're freaking happy.
You'll hear me comment about them shortly. Don't worry.
Yeah, I'm like, you know, watching Chirrut and Baze get taken out by these guys. I'm like, happy now, Tim. But yeah, so it had already been established. Like, these guys were the best of the best. Like, there was, you know, already that one rebel soldier when, I mean, the Death Trooper showed up, they killed a few guys, the rest of the rebels retreated like into this bunker, and then they had to get over to like flip this switch to send a transmission up to the fleet. And one guy's like, all right, I'm going for it. Takes like 2 steps and gets nailed in the chest and he's out. And so for Chirrut to be able to walk the whole way, I was like, no, these guys aren't just missing. And he's not just being lucky. Like, there's something going on here. And obviously he's not like deflecting blaster bolts or dodging out of the way or anything, but like, because you also got the sense with Chirrut that he was almost kind of like Daredevil in a way too, where like, even if he couldn't use the Force, just the fact that he's blind and has, you know, devoted himself to his training so much, like he definitely had heightened senses and everything. Like in that battle where they're on Iadu, and there's the dogfight going on in the sky with the X-Wings and the TIE fighters, and he's got like his bow staff crossbow thing, and he just kind of like holds his, you know, like blows on his hand, holds it up to the wind to see like what direction the wind is going, and he can hear the TIE fighter going by and just like shoots the thing straight out of the air. I was like, and you know,
that's something you would do in Battlefront, Kyle. You do that all the time.
I don't know.
Okay, I'm glad you pointed that out.
I can't do that with my eyes closed, Tim. Just I had no idea the ship flying overhead. But see, that was something where it's like, well, you could say he's using the Force, but then they go out of their way to show you that he has, you know, these heightened senses, and he has his ways of sort of seeing without seeing to a degree. And it's not just by like meditating and focusing on the Force, but it's, you know, he hears footsteps and he senses, you know, feelings in the ground and whatever. Like, he's just very, very in tune with his other senses and everything, and just very, you know, highly trained. But at that moment when he's walking across the beach and the death troopers are all shooting at him, I'm like, he's not doing anything. He's not dodging. He's not trying to, you know, predict the safest course or hide behind cover or anything. He's just walking right out there in the open. So I was like, I think it seemed pretty obvious to me, like the Force was protecting him right there.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed out that whole thing of putting his hand on his mouth and then putting it up in the air. I had no idea why he was doing that. I'm glad you pointed out that it was to catch the wind or something, because I was curious. Why the heck is he doing that now?
Yeah, it was something like that.
Yeah, I think that might have been it. Yeah, it looked very mystical.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the real reason. Come on.
Yeah. But then for him to get across there and hit the thing, and then for the Death Troopers to just blow it up right behind him, and that was it for him. But like, yeah, I think all the deaths of the main characters, like you said, were heroic, and they were all meaningful. It was like they all served a purpose. They either died accomplishing an objective or died right after having accomplished an objective. So it's like, okay, they can get killed off now, but they made their big contribution. I mean, like Bodhi. In the ship.
That was the one.
It wasn't like he died trying to get to the ship, but it was just like, he was in there, he got it done, and then the shore trooper was like, oh, I think somebody's doing something in there. Let me just chuck a grenade.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was his death was the one that made me really think, okay, if he's not surviving, I don't think anyone is. Because, like you said, he wasn't in an active battle. He was in his ship, pretty well protected. But no, the shore trooper just chucks that grenade in there, and it sucked because he realized Chirrut did his job. He got that. I forget exactly. He was turning on that switch, and then they realized that they can get the transmission across, and then not too long after that, he gets blown up in there. So I was like, oh man, they're completing their missions, but they're making the ultimate sacrifice while doing it. And
technically, K2SO could possibly survive if some crazy author wanted to write a comic or book about how he not only put up the Death Star plans, but they also beamed up his backup Cloud Brain up into the plans as well.
What was funny?
Pop him in another droid.
Yeah, I was reading an article earlier that said, they were like, oh, this one actor from Rogue One has an option in their contract for a possible sequel or another movie or something. And of course, it was one of these like clickbait kind of things where like they don't tell you who it is. You got to click it and read the article to find out. So I'm like, I was thinking about it before I clicked. I'm like, okay, if any of them could come back, and I don't think they're going to, because it didn't say like they're coming back for a sequel. It said they had an option for it. And I was like, which one of them could I possibly see coming back? Well, yeah, maybe K2SO, because we saw even in this movie there were multiple versions of that same, multiple models of that same kind of droid. So yeah, they could have, salvaged his brain or something, and or just maybe a different rebel spy goes and reprograms another one of those Imperial droids, and it's K3SO or something. But
C-3PO has been in much worse situations and got back together normal. So if they wanted to, K2SO could be brought back.
Yeah. But no, and then it ended up being Felicity Jones, and it was just, I'm pretty sure it was just like from the outset they were thinking, well, if this works and if we do keep her alive, we could bring her back for a future, a different movie. But yeah, I don't think. And
I forgot too regarding K2SO, the Death Star shot its beam right on that location, so no one's putting it back together.
Again, the only way that could maybe happen is if, like you said, Joey, if they somehow transmitted his data, or if it got saved to a cloud system somewhere, or if they just created another version of a different Imperial droid. But
Cassian could have had a backup or something like that, and
there you go.
And then like, oh yeah, right before they went off, he backed up him, and then they went on the so the new K2SO would not remember all the stuff that happened, but he yeah, sure, why not? And just real quick about death scenes. I mean, the Cassian and Jen, that was just beautiful. I mean, the way you would think that getting blown up wouldn't be so, like, it just had that moment of just relaxing and knowing they had accomplished their mission. The destruction that they decided to do with the Death Star this time, with these little blasts, was it was really interesting, because they always did it in kind of like, it's in the horizon, and it's coming towards us. The first time we're going to escape it, and the second time we're just going to give in, and we're going to know, like, there's no way around this. We're just going to take this. We know we did our job. Your dad would be proud of you. And just kind of that moment of just hugging and just disappear, and that's I was just beautiful. It was just beautiful.
Yeah.
It was beautiful. I was going to talk about this more later when we talk about favorite moments and stuff, but I guess, while we're on the subject, we can just talk about it now. We haven't even talked about the villains yet, but part of the reason I love that ending so much was not only Jin and Cassian's deaths, but also Krennic's. Because, Joey, we talked about, like, right after we saw the movie yesterday, how we were kind of surprised that Vader didn't come after him or something.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just like sort of how sort of ironic and cruel it was for him but at the same time, just sort of it made for a really interesting twist in the story. The fact that the Death Star is like his baby, it was his project that he spent so much time working on. And then, for Tarkin to basically be like, hey, you got it working. Good job. I'm gonna take that. Thank you very much. And, snatch it out from under him. And, for Krennic to just be so, sort of ambitious. And he thought that was going to be his key to like his rise to the top. And instead for him to kind of be, smacked back down by Tarkin and Vader. And then at the end for him to just watch as the Death Star rises over the horizon. And when it first showed up, I was like, oh, okay, what are they going to do? Are they just going to like launch, reinforcements like from the Death Star or something? But then, I mean, just the way it unfolded was so beautiful because even, right off the bat, it's not like Tarkin was like, okay, we're approaching Scarif, prepare to wipe out the base. It was just, I mean, I'll have to go watch it again, but from what I remember, it was a lot of, just sort of silent shots with the music playing and just things sort of unfolding slowly. It's just, you hear the music swelling up and the Death Star rising over the horizon. And it just kind of dawned on me like, oh, snap, they're just going to like blow up their own base. And it's going to take out, Jin and Cassian and Krennic and everybody, but especially just, the look on Krennic's face as he sort of came to that realization. It was like, man, I devoted so much of my life and my career for this thing in service of the Empire, and now not only have they taken it away from me, but they're gonna kill me with it. Like, that's not how this was supposed to go.
Yeah, the Empire should have done that too on Endor, but
and the laser blast actually hits the Sentinel of where he was first before hitting the horizon, so he got the full brunt of that blast before anybody else.
Oh, I guess I didn't even catch that because you know what? Because I guess I was just surprised when it happened because I was expecting them to just score a direct hit and wipe out the base like they did with the city on Jeddah, and so when the laser beam goes across the top of the tower and then off into the ocean, I wasn't thinking, oh snap, there goes Krennic. I was thinking, what the heck, you missed. But then you see the big explosion going off in the background. I mean, obviously they kind of did that on purpose just to give a little more time for like the emotional moment between Jin and Cassian as they realize their fate. And you just see basically what equates to, the Star Wars equivalent of like an atomic bomb explosion just coming towards them and knowing they can't do anything about it. It was just kind of a beautiful and touching moment and sad, but at the same time, it's not like we knew that they were going to die or knew that they were going to die in that fashion. But like we said, it wasn't a huge surprise to anybody. We weren't expecting them to, survive to take place or to take part in the Death Star trench run or anything like that. So, but yeah, it was, very fitting.
Yeah, definitely. So let's get to the villain characters in the Empire, and I'm going to go ahead and start off with this one.
We're going 2 hours on this, right?
Yeah, let's go for it. Got an hour left. So
just making sure, because obviously we're talking the heck out of this.
Yeah. Kyle, you're exactly right. I was extremely happy with the Death Trooper. I mean, just the presence that they had from the beginning in the opening prologue was cool. And the one thing I didn't expect from them was how they talked and communicated, where it was just like gibberish over a microphone type thing. And I actually kind of like that because it makes their enemies think, maybe they're not human. There's something more. Like, what are these?
That's what I was wondering. I was like, wait, are these like droids or cyborgs or something? And I mean, I kind of like that they just leave it ambiguous and just make them these mysterious, imposing figures.
Yeah, I like that too, but I just got the visual guide and it gave a little more insight to the Death Troopers. They are definitely human, but they do go through like some medical enhancement or augmentation, so they're not, as normal as humans be. They have some, differences and augmentations to them that make them a little enhanced. So maybe that affected the voice. It didn't say that in the book where that's the reason why they talk like that, but I just kind of like to think they can hear themselves when they're communicating, but what's projected for everyone else, they can't make out what it says. So I thought it was cool, and I like that. But yeah. But they were in it, I felt, what I expected, and they did what I was hoping for. Once Krennic gave the order to have them join the battle, I was like, all right, here we go. Because I will be honest, I will say the Scarif battle, it was going more the Rebels' way than I would like it to. Let's see some more short troopers, get some hits in there. But yeah, when the Death Troopers came in, they were taking them all down as I was expecting and hoping they would.
Well, yeah, but you had to remember the Rebels initially came in there with a squad of like 20 guys.
Yeah,
so
but still, that's why
every time, like, because you did see stormtroopers take out a few of them, and every time a Rebel soldier went down, I'm thinking in my head like, okay, now how many does that leave left? Like, I wasn't counting out the exact numbers, but I was like, on the one hand, yeah, maybe it feels like there should be a few more casualties on the Rebel side because they're up against, just waves of stormtroopers. But on the other hand, they can't kill them all off, or this battle will be over really quickly.
And you got the feeling if these rebels were like the best of the best when it came to these guys, they made a point of saying these guys are assassins, these guys are these folks that they kind of guerrilla warfare folks. So I really got the idea that these were like the best of the best soldiers the rebellion had at that moment. I agree with you, Kyle. Like I didn't want any of those guys to die right away, because I'd be like, how are they going to make 10 men feel like 100 if they just get knocked off right away by a stormtrooper?
Yeah, you can't. You can make 10 men feel like 100, but once you get down to 9, 8, 7, 6, then it starts feeling like 20 or 30.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still didn't see the Empire missing that much. It's like, especially I was hoping the shore troopers would do better. They got their little moments with that one through the grenade, but still, it's like, come on, guy.
By the way, with all the characters that got killed by grenades in this movie, was I the only one hoping that one of those was going to be one of the thermal imploders from Battlefront?
Oh, that would have been cool. Yeah,
especially because really cool. They were all like more sort of elongated in shape, and they thermal detonators. I kept thinking like, "Ooh, is this going to be like some different kind of grenade?" And then no, it's just regular explosion.
That would have been
it would have been cool if the one that Death Trooper had for Bay. That would have been a really cool way to do it.
Or the one that the
manual would have.
Either
it would be the Death Trooper.
Either that one or the one that the guy threw in the ship. Of course, it was probably just not even me like hoping that, but just like it's like I've been conditioned that way from playing Battlefront. I see a grenade that's not a circle, and I'm like, oh, something really bad's about to happen.
Yeah.
So yeah, Death Troopers were cool. Like you mentioned, Kyle, that moment where they're just sitting there waiting for any rebels to come out of that bunker, and he just picks them off. It was like, yes, that's how they should be. They're elite troopers, and they're showing it. So I was definitely happy with him. It wasn't Captain Phasma all over again. So
no,
I was relieved on that front.
Yeah. Well, what was funny too? I kind of had a moment towards the end of the movie, and I think it was right around the time that Krennic is like in his command center with his Death Troopers, and he says something like, 2 of you guards come with me and send the rest of my my elite guards into battle, or something like that. And then I think after that, it's like you just see Krennic and his 2 guys going off, and I was at that point kind of thinking, we're getting kind of close to the end of the movie here, and we still haven't really seen those Death Troopers do anything. And I was like, I hope they're not just going to be, just standing by his side the whole time. And then I was like, oh, well, he did say like send another squad of them off. So hopefully we'll see them in the battle. And then sure enough, they land and just start wreaking havoc, wreaking havoc on people. So
my only nitpick about that sequence is you see them come off their ship making this cool entrance, but then it cuts to the space battle. Like, no, let me see something. Let me see them shoot somebody first. But they got their due, so it wasn't all bad.
But yeah, another great reason to show why they're not around too. They all got blowed up.
Mm-hmm.
So
makes sense. And especially with Krennic being, sort of like the head, the guy in charge of like intelligence and special weapons projects and stuff, you definitely kind of got the sense that the squad of Death Troopers was like something sort of experimental that he had created. for himself, and that this wasn't, you know, sort of an imperial wide program that they were instituting.
Yeah.
Again, if only they had them for Endor, they'd start to still been around. But
You know, Tim, have you ever seen THX 1138, the actual movie?
you know what? I probably shouldn't say this as a Star Wars fan, or diehard Star Wars fan, but no, I have not seen it.
It's okay. I haven't either.
While not, I have not yet seen the special edition because George Lucas does not like to put out anything on Blu-ray or DVD without at least a once over again. I've seen the original a few times back in the, you know, in the late '90s and early 2000s, you know, and those Death Troopers, the sound of them really sounded a lot like these stormtrooper-esque police guys. Who walk around, and there are elements of THX 1138 in this movie, both with those Death Trooper sounds, because there's a lot of walkie-talkie sounds in THX 1138. It's you know, it's George Lucas kind of doing his last experimental-ish kind of film, and the Death Star engineers or scientists all had those kind of like white tunic kind of overall or whatever you call them. Looked very much again like THX 1138, where everyone is kind of you know, has shaved heads and in these white suits, and they have these kind of intimidating guards walking around with kind of walkie-talkie voices and stuff like that. So to me, I thought that was definitely influenced perhaps by THX 1138, which I liked a lot.
That's a good call. I know I've seen little clippets and snippets here and there from like Star Wars and George Lucas documentaries. So I know what you're talking about as far as how some of them look. So that's a good call.
Yeah, it's worth checking out.
But what do you guys think of Krennic as the villain? So for me anyway, he was someone I thought he was. Ben Mendelsohn did great in the part. I thought he was really good. But reading the novel Catalyst beforehand, that really helped. I think made me enjoy the character more, just knowing all that he's been through to get to where he was at, his relationship with Galen Erso, and kind of like how you were mentioning, Kyle, that moment where he died, where the thing he just put everything into was the cause of his destruction in the end, and knowing what he did in Catalyst too, and even how him and Tarkin had this rivalry even then, and he tried to get rid of Tarkin before Tarkin got rid of him, so it definitely helped a lot in me enjoying his character more, knowing the history and his backstory. But I thought his presence in the movie was good too. And the way he pretty much showed no mercy for anyone, just casually telling his Death Troopers to kill those scientists and even Galen's wife. So I thought he made for a good villain in the movie.
Yeah, I don't know my expectations for Krennic. I was kind of like well, he looks like a standard kind of Imperial guy, and I didn't know if I'd really care that much about him. But so before we met to go see the movie and go eat some In-N-Out burger and stuff like that before seeing the movie, I went into Target next door and looked, and there was a Krennic figure in there, and I was like, you know what? If I really like the movie and I really like Krennic, I'm going to come back here after the movie and buy Krennic. And just to make sure he would still be there, I just hid him behind a Chewbacca Furby. and came back. I knew exactly where to go to get him. And yeah, now I'm opening him up right here. So here we go. There we go. Nice. Krennic, nice. out of his package, out of carbonite. There we go. And he looks great.
See, Kyle, you and me should get our Death Trooper figures and just have them placed right beside him.
Oh, yeah. There you go. Yeah, no, I thought he was good. I mean, he was the one character that, I mean, I guess I didn't really know what to expect from him going into the movie because they didn't really show much of him in the trailer. But when we talked earlier about just like the performances and stuff, I guess the only thing I didn't like just from the trailers, like he has that one line where he's like talking to Vader and says like, the power that we are dealing with is immeasurable. And I thought that was kind of hammy in the trailer. Like I just, I wasn't crazy about that. And that ended up not being even in the movie from what I can remember. So, and I thought, what actually was in the movie as far as his performance and stuff was, kind of surprised me, but I liked it. He was definitely, kind of right in line with what you would expect from an Imperial officer in one sense, in terms of, again, sort of his ruthlessness and ambition and all that kind of thing. but also he was different at the same time. Not what we've come to expect. You got the feeling he was kind of like the underdog, trying to work his way up through the ranks against, sort of pushing back against Tarkin and all these more sort of stuffy, elite upper class kind of guys. If I think I've read, in some article or something recently, they're comparing Krennic to other Imperial officers. They're like, normally if the Empire needs a new officer, they just go to the Royal Shakespeare Company and, just recruit some, proper elderly British guy. And Krennic kind of went against that stereotype a little bit, where he's got a little bit more of a temper. He, doesn't do things the same way that all those other guys do. And even to the point where, he goes to Vader at one point, and I was a little fuzzy about sort of who was wanting to talk to who in the first place, because I think Vader did say something about like, that's not why I summoned you here or something while he was talking to Krennic, but I got the sense that Krennic was like going to Vader to be like, hey, I built this thing and it works, and now Tarkin's trying to take it away from me, and I'm going to the one guy who's sort of outside the normal Imperial chain of command to see if you can kind of help me do something about it. So, definitely he came across there as kind of both like bold and resourceful, but also desperate and almost kind of like a little kid, like tattling to the teacher, like, hey, Bobby's trying to cheat off my homework,
Yeah,
he was going to the teacher's aide, Darth Vader, to go talk to the main teacher, the Emperor.
At the end of that conversation, he's like, so does this mean I'm still in command of the Death Star?
Don't choke on your ambitions.
Oh man, so good.
But even after being choked by Darth Vader and being on his knees, he still had that little smile, like, okay, it's going to work out after all. I'm going to get this back.
I survived my encounter with Darth Vader. Like, can't get any worse from here.
Yeah, I love. And the Black Series figure is amazing, by the way. I mean, the likeness is fantastic. It really they got him down. They got him down. It's very good. Good purchase. If you can find him, get him. That's my
get him
opinion.
and hopefully a few Death Troopers too, because that would make the set more complete.
Yep.
Yeah. Now, I guess the only other real villain we have to talk about. Well, we can talk about Vader and Tarkin, but Vader specifically, I want to leave most of my discussion on him for later when we talk about our favorite moments of the movie, because Vader's only in like 2 scenes, and they were arguably my 2 favorite scenes of the movie. One of them was definitely my favorite scene, so I'll talk about that more in detail in a bit. But let's just say they did the character justice. Like, it didn't feel gratuitous, like, oh, let's just bring in Darth Vader because the fans will want to see him. And at the same time, it didn't feel like they overdid it and like, let's just have Darth Vader be the main bad guy in this movie because it's Star Wars and Vader, and why not? Like, I think it was the way they used him was very smart. It was restrained in a sense that it let the other characters, all have their moments to shine, and Vader didn't just come in and overshadow everybody. But at the same time, it was like when he was there, he was really there, and it was, some of his best moments we've ever seen. So yeah, I thought they did him really well.
Yeah, I mean, I really couldn't ask for more for how they used Vader, and it felt, like you said, Kyle, it just felt perfect. It didn't feel like, oh, that's it. Like, I wish Vader was in it more, and then he didn't overshadow the other characters. He was just used really perfectly, and definitely the most memorable scenes in the movie, that's for sure. So yeah, like you, we'll talk about that scene in a little bit, but just Vader overall, I thought was used perfectly. And as always, it was great to have James Earl Jones voice him again. But I don't know if you guys felt this way too, but did his voice sound just a little off, a little different? Because to me, it sounded like if James Earl Jones hasn't voiced Vader in a long time, it's like, okay, James Earl Jones is older, so he sounds different, which they kind of had that feel. But to me, we just heard him in Rebels a few months ago, and he sounded like classic James Earl Jones and Darth Vader in that. So it kind of threw me off a little bit why it sounded a little different. I don't know if you guys felt that way, but
well, see, here's the thing. I would disagree with you there a little bit, because I do think he sounded a little bit different than he has in the past, just because, again, he's older. Your voice is going to sound different when you're 70 or 80 or however James Earl Jones is now than he was back in the 70s when he did this for the first time. But I think I noticed the same thing on Rebels, and it stuck out to me a little bit more on Rebels that but it didn't bother me quite so much because, again, it's James Earl Jones coming back to do Vader, but it is an animated series. So in my mind, it's like, it doesn't have to sound exactly like it did in the movies. But it did kind of, I wouldn't say bother me, but I noticed it, it kind of stuck out to me in Rebels. But then here, I think I noticed that maybe a little bit too. I was like, wait, he sounds a little bit different, but it's not bugging me, or like I feel like I've heard this before. And then I'm like, oh yeah, it's because he sounds exactly like he does on Rebels. But I've kind of had that to already get me, used to hearing him sounding a little bit different as Vader. So that was okay to me.
Yeah, total opposite reaction. But how about you, Joey? Where did you land on this?
Well,
on the Pennsylvania
I'm kind of with Kyle that, I mean, he did sound, in my opinion, a little bit better than he did in Rebels. But another thing to keep in mind, though, is that Vader in A New Hope sounds very different than Empire and Jedi. I mean, he's more of a nasally guy up here. He goes, tear the ship apart and whereas, and then of course the infamous, my favorite line of Vader, sometimes, is what. Just that, and that is such, like, that is not that the typical Vader that we are familiar with. Now we'd expect him to go, what? Something like that.
Well, I was going to say, like, it does kind of sound the same. You just never really hear him yell in the other movies.
Yes.
Like, I think in A New Hope, he's just a little more, unhinged. And then in Empire and Jedi, they were like, okay, let's just have him stay calm and collected the entire time. A, so that he's more intimidating, and B, so that his voice stays lower.
Yes. I think so. With that in mind, I thought he sounded older, but it didn't. His voice changing to me, it's always like, well, it just depends on where you press one little button on his chest plate, his voice goes a little higher. Another button, it goes a little lower. So you just had to modify the volume and pitch buttons on him that day, and there you go.
See, my in-universe explanation for that is he just got out of the back of the tank and he's just adjusting to the helmet and the breathing apparatus. So that's why it sounds a little different.
but what a cool, and just real quick about that back to tank, what a cool transition. And I think it was Kyle, I think you were talking online afterwards, and you had mentioned that it really felt like that was Anakin in that suit. When Vader makes his appearance in the suit with the smoke and everything, I really felt like as a great transition from Revenge of the Sith to A New Hope Vader. Like, I could see, instead of, it's just a guy, it's Vader, I could really picture, okay, that's Anakin in that suit right now, walking around. I really liked that, the feeling when Vader came in for, multiple reasons. That was neat to see.
Yeah,
totally agree. Honestly, guys, how cool was it that it was on Mustafar? I mean,
yeah,
I almost lost it when I saw, like, oh man. First I was like, what is this planet?
Sure,
what are they
let's
doing?
Go ahead and talk about that moment then. I was going to save that for when we're talking about our favorite moments. But the fact that, again, Joey, like, you and me and Jason Hunt, we were all like silently geeking out about this as we were seeing it in the movie, just leaning over and looking at each other like,
like Kyle's hands were like this. Like covering his, trying not, like, I'm watching him, his hands are over his face like he's about to start screaming like a little girl. It was so funny. I looked over at him, I was just like, oh my gosh.
Realization of, again, of seeing Vader for the first time. Like, we knew he was going to be in there, but I always just assumed that he was going to show up on the bridge of a Star Destroyer or on the Death Star or something like that. And when we start seeing this planet that, again, we can assume it's Mustafar. It was like the only planet in the movie that they didn't put up the little title on the bottom.
I know.
But it was
quick,
like,
it is officially confirmed that it is Mustafar because Pablo Hidalgo sent out a tweet that it's the planet where Jedi go to die, which was a line from the season 1 finale Rebels. So there you go.
But seeing this river of lava, and I mean, it was definitely more sort of I don't know if subdued is the right word, but there was more sort of land mass and less
Yeah.
just flowing lava everywhere than what we saw in Revenge of the Sith. So first I'm thinking like, is this Mustafar? It looks like Mustafar. And if it is, like, what's going on here? You know, and then as you just see this giant spire, and I kind of just, you know, it hit me like we've heard in, you know, there's been references in EU materials and in, you know, Joey, you were even saying like this was something that Ralph McQuarrie came up with in concepts for the original Star Wars. And yeah, I think actually I remember reading too, like it was, you know, in an early draft for either Empire or Jedi that Darth Vader's castle, like Darth Vader was going to have his own castle essentially. And, you know, that he had his own sort of, you know, fortress where he, you know, went to do his own thing. And had absolutely no idea we were going to see that in this movie. And so that wasn't like something that I was hoping for, or you know, it's not like I've always been a fan of, oh, I think Darth Vader should get his own castle. So that wasn't why I was freaking out about it, but just realizing like, A, we're about to see Vader for the first time, and I wasn't expecting that was what this scene was about. And B, that like, holy crap, they took this, you know, cool, expanded universe concept, or, you know, abandoned movie concept of Darth Vader's castle, and here it is. Like, wow, that was really cool.
There's a cool bit of info about that in the visual guide. I'm just scrolling through it right now, so I can read it off as far as, you know, the reasoning for why he's there and all that. So I'm trying to flip through it and find it real quick. Because it made you wonder, okay, like, is Darth Vader just there to get healed up, or does he that where he lives? But what's the deal with it? So in the official visual guide, it says, it's titled Dark Monolith, where it goes, Vader's personal abode is an obsidian tower on an inhospitable world. It is by the Emperor's design that Vader lives in such an unforgiving environment. Vader's attendant, Vani, visits Vader as he meditates within a rejuvenation chamber. So it says a stark modern structure. It's built over an ancient castle full of dark secrets. So that was pretty crazy that this is the Emperor's design. He wants them to live there in those conditions. Yes. At first I thought maybe Vader's decided to stay at Mustafar, you know, just to feel his hate, to give him more to the dark side, because that's where everything went wrong for him. Just to feel his hate and hatred for Obi-Wan, so maybe that's why he lives there. But it's by the Emperor's design, so I find that really fascinating, and hopefully would get more information as to why all that, and why the Emperor is doing all that with Vader. I just think it's really cool.
Yeah,
that makes so much sense now that I hear that the Emperor was the one who actually said, yeah, you know, and just because especially in the Vader comic and in Lords of the Sith and things like that, you really get the feeling that Palpatine just loves just twisting the knife on Vader, of like, I have you where I want you, are under my thumb right now, Vader, and don't forget how much I'm the master of you. And just to prove it even more, I'm putting you on the planet where everything came. And I'm sure he spins it to the point of, because you need to be fueled by your hatred. You need to be constantly reminded of, you know, your betrayal of Obi-Wan and how you killed your wife and everything like that. But you know, the alternate meaning thing is, so I can also keep you down, and be on top of you, which is, that's so cool. I love that.
Hey, I bought you a new house. Come up here to the balcony and look at this amazing view. You see that over there? That's where you get your legs chopped off.
That's sweet.
That was really cool. And I guess, okay, so one other thing I wanted to mention as far as villains go, and I was going to mention this a little bit later too, but what did you guys think of Tarkin's inclusion in the movie, and sort of the way that they, you know, obviously sort of recreated him through CGI and just the extent that they used him to?
Yeah, for me, I pretty much knew he was going to be in the movie already, and I've heard people, and Kyle, we were talking about this rumor on one of our episodes when it first got, you know, was out there, and I figured this to me was one of those rumors, like, nah, it's one of those ones that's never going to happen. They're going to recreate Tarkin just fully CG. That's going to be the most expensive, you know, like CG effect ever. Like, I don't think so. But I was dead wrong on that one. There he was. And I got to say, because some of the reviews I've read and heard before that were referencing that said it wasn't the greatest. Like, I knew what they were going for. They didn't quite reach it. I was kind of had my expectations low, and just to be prepared for something pretty jarring. And I got to say, I thought he looked pretty good. I mean, of course, you could tell it was CG, but it's definitely as good as you're going to get right now. And after his first scene, it did take a little bit to get used to in the first time you see him. But in the following season, especially at the end, where he says the classic line, "You may fire when ready," it felt like I was just watching Tarkin there. So I thought, for the most part, they pulled it off. Of course, it's only going to improve on later on if they decide to go that route. But this is kind of a big step as far as future possibilities in movie making, as far as getting actors who have passed away but recreating their roles in CG. They're almost there. They're not quite there yet, but I think this is a big step for that. But for me, actually, what took a little more while for me to get used to was his voice, because I don't think it was Steven Stanton who was doing it.
Oh.
It didn't sound like what we're used to from him in Clone Wars and Rebels. So that to me sounded a little more off than how he was recreated in CG. But eventually there was moments where he sounded like the classic Tarkin. So overall, I thought he served the purpose in the movie well, and I thought for the most part the CG worked.
Yeah, he was voiced by, and the actor who portrayed him was Guy Henry, who we looked up some information on him while the credits were scrolling up. We're furiously going through IMDb at the same time, and the Guy Henry's been in a few like British things, but here in the States we don't really see him in much. I think he was in a couple of the Harry Potter films, which I've not seen any of. But he's the main thing that stood out for me wasn't necessarily his voice, which I knew they weren't going to get exactly right anyway, because even Steven Stanton, I mean, who is just remarkable, he does a fantastic job. It's never, I was a little disappointed that it wasn't him, but at the same time, it's like if it was Steven Stanton, then they would probably have to get Steven Stanton to be the stand-in at that point right there as well, because I'm under the assumption that they probably put Guy Henry in, right there, and probably put those little white motion capture dots all over his face to make sure they got the motion, the lip sync as, close as possible. And that would have just added another layer of complexity to say, okay, you're just the body, and then we're going to put a different guy's voice on top of you with the face. I just don't know if they could really do that. Because I'm just thinking back to like how they're making the new Planet of the Apes movies and everything like that, and the actors are usually right there, with motion capture things right on top of their faces and stuff. So I'm assuming that's probably what they did with Tarkin in this case. I was surprised that he was in the movie as much as he was. I was definitely surprised that when we first got that first introduction of him, I expected just to see the back of his head, and then cut away and maybe see a little bit of his face. But to have like full-on scenes back and forth between him and Krennic was surprising. And then, the CG wasn't perfect, but it was, like you said, it was about as close as we're ever going to get to that for at least the foreseeable future, I would think. ILM, took a big risk on that, and I think they did a fantastic job. The only thing that was actually throwing me wasn't necessarily even the face or anything. It was just thinking afterwards, like, is Tarkin really that tall? I didn't, and we didn't have Vader next to him. I guess, just from what I've been hearing is that Peter Cushing was actually 6 foot tall, which is surprising to me. And I guess Guy Henry, the actor who played him, was actually 6'5". So they might have adjusted his height a little bit digitally, perhaps. But other than his height, and sometimes the corners of Tarkin's mouth, that's always like, if you're just 1% off, on these things, it's easy to tell because we all know human faces. The corners of the mouth were sometimes just a little bit off, but I appreciated it. I was glad to see Tarkin back up, and it made absolute sense to have him up and trying out that Death Star with those little preliminary tests. To take out his enemy in this case. Was nice to see.
I have to say I like what they were going for there, but I don't know, it felt like a little bit much to me. Again, he was in there more than I thought he was, more than I expected. I wasn't too surprised to see him in the movie at all, but I was surprised to see him as early as we did and then as often as we did. And yeah, to me, I actually thought the voice was really good. I thought it was Steven Stanton doing the voice. And then, was surprised to find out it was somebody else. But to me, at least vocally, they pretty much nailed it. Or at least, was different enough that, like, again, knowing that the original actor is dead, like, that was as close as they could. It was like, obviously we know it's not going to be Peter Cushing, but they came pretty darn close. And I was willing to forgive that. Kind of same with Vader. But then if you're going to go for the digital recreation, like, you got to nail it. Like, and it was impressive that they came as close as they did. I thought just in terms of like molding, or modeling the face and making it look just like him, they pretty much nailed that. To me, it was actually just the movements bugged me a little bit.
I could see that.
There were some scenes where he's talking or kind of looking back and forth, and just the movements of his head and the movements of his eyes just looked slightly off, a little unnatural, especially just kind of his head moving up and down or whatever. There were some scenes where it definitely felt a little too quick or like not smooth enough or whatever. Just little things that stuck out that was like, not like that's a terrible fake effect or something, but just off enough that, again, like you said, Joey, we look at human faces all the time, so it's really hard to recreate that. And it's like sometimes you can't even put your finger on it, but you just know from experience for having been alive and looked at real human faces for X number of years that, like, there's something slightly off about that one. And then there was also what they call the uncanny valley effect, which is a term that came around when they started doing some of these like CGI motion capture characters and stuff. It's like, even if the face looks really realistic, sometimes they have trouble making the eyes look lifelike, because it's like, and not necessarily lifelike, but looking like they're actually looking at something. And I do remember one specific instance, I forget what scene it was in, but Tarkin's talking to Krennic and then just kind of starts looking like side to side, and his eyes kind of like dart back and forth, but it doesn't really look like he's looking at anything. And again, it's one of those sort of unquantifiable things, like, well, how do you know when somebody is looking at something? I don't know, but I know that's not it. So, I don't know, maybe it's just me having the critical, like, trained eye of someone who's been to film school, but that was, kind of one of my smaller gripes with the movie. like, and again, on the one hand, I can't blame them for trying. I think it was a cool idea to bring Tarkin into it. But I also, honestly, again, I'm willing to forgive the fact that Peter Cushing is no longer with us and that you got to get as close as you can. So if they had just found an actor who looked a lot like him and then sort of, maybe added some prosthetics to his face or just sort of made some digital enhancements instead of going full CGI, like, I would have been willing to forgive. Like, okay, that doesn't look exactly like Tarkin, but that's who it's supposed to be in the story. Right. Whereas if you're gonna make him from, make it digital, like, knowing what they can do with special effects nowadays, I'm like, well, okay, if you're gonna go that route, like, you better freaking nail it. Like, I'd rather have a real person who kind of looks like Tarkin but not exactly than have a digital Tarkin that looks exactly like Tarkin, but I can tell it's not a real person.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, they did that with Dodonna. They didn't make a CGI Dodonna up there. I mean, they just got a bearded guy up there. But that being said, I mean,
all these other guys.
Yeah. But that being said, I mean, you 5 minutes after this movie is done, Tarkin is supposed to look like Tarkin, and there's a few years in between A New Hope and Return of the Jedi when we next see Mon Mothma, and so obviously it's played by two different actresses, and whatever. But I just gotta, I really admire ILM for going for it, and I think that was something that I think was probably introduced the concept anyway with George Lucas. I remember when the prequels were coming out, and especially with episode 2, the rumors were going around that Lucas really wanted to have a CGI Anakin, and he was going to be completely CG. And just those crazy rumors that they were gonna figure out a way to age Jake Lloyd on a computer and do all that, and people were really believed it for a while. Just to think how ridiculous that would have looked if they actually did try something like that. But I'm fairly certain that ILM has been working on that for a while, and we've come a long way from like Forrest Gump or even before that. I remember the first time something like this happened, where there was a dead actor doing something like this, was probably. And Kyle, you're probably way too young to remember this, but Fred Astaire had this vacuum commercial or a carpet sweeper commercial, I think in the 90s, where Fred Astaire was dancing around with a vacuum cleaner, and people got very offended, like, you can't do that. He's a dead actor. You can't do that. But we're definitely in a world now where we don't even need old stock footage. Whereas like that Fred Astaire footage or Forrest Gump was, just take old footage and just, superimpose lips or something on top of them to make them look a little differently. I think with this movie, and then of course the Marvel films that have been coming out recently, we're right on the edge of something really big within the next 5-10 years. I think they're going to get it exactly right, and especially this was probably a very expensive effect, but as we all know, they're expensive the first time through, and then once you figure out the software for it, it tends to get much cheaper, and that means we're going to see a lot more people doing it as well. So it's exciting to me to see what this is going to lead to in the next few years and what we'll be able to see.
Yeah, well, see, I just hope that until they can nail it absolutely 100%, like that they don't go overboard with it. It's just like when Avatar came out and the 3D was fantastic. And so everybody was like, okay, every movie now we're releasing in 3D, and most of them looked nowhere near as good as that did, So I would hate to see them do that here. And I'm not criticizing ILM for trying it or for even including it in the movie. I think it was a cool way to get Tarkin in there. I just thought they could have. I thought they should have showed a little more restraint, given that, at least for me, I could tell that it wasn't
not perfected
perfect.
Yet.
Yeah, so I think they could have just toned down his role a little bit, had him in a couple less scenes, or had more scenes or more shots of him, with his back to the camera or looking out a window or something like that, and then only have him turn around and show his face like when he has to deliver like a really potent line or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but yeah, for the most part, it was cool that, like you said, Joey, that they tried it, and for the most part, and I know it's going to differ on different people's opinion on it, but at least for me, and hopefully for a lot of people, they could have that effect. It was cool to see Tarkin, and for the most part, they pulled it off as far as him being there. But
well, I'm kind of curious, Tim, and if we could kind of segue here, because I know pretty much what we were just going to talk about next is like our favorite and least favorite parts, right?
Yeah, like before we get that, but I was going to ask you guys as far as what you thought of some of the cameos that we got in there, especially the Rebels ones, which I thought were pretty cool, and more than I expected, actually.
I still got to see it. I got to go back in to see Chopper, because apparently
I barely saw him. I saw it the last second.
Oh gosh, yeah, I heard
him, but I heard he was in there.
Yeah, he's apparently in the scene where what they're handing off the report, like, oh, there's a stuff going on Scarif, and they say, don't you dare go over to Mon Mothma that way, you guy. But I guess Chopper's in the background right there, kind of out of focus and stuff. So, but that was really cool. Seeing the ghost, awesome. But of course, I was, Kyle, you called the ending a little bit, but I was really hoping that we'd get, General Syndulla or Captain Syndulla, over the intercom, when all these, people online were speculating, oh, we're going to see Hera, we're going to see Sabine or whatever, like in live action. And I was thinking, no, we're not going to see that. But I could totally see them just throwing in that line over the intercom. And they did. And that just put a smile on my face, because it worked perfectly. And we were freaking out like, oh my gosh, and then just to hear the audience behind us just going right over their heads because they don't, if you don't watch Rebels, so whatever. So that was a cool fan service moment right there. Neat to see.
Yeah, definitely.
So I also thought it was cool. I wasn't expecting having Gold Leader and Red Leader show up in the space battle. That was a nice cool little touch.
Now, see, that was cool too, because it was kind of too quick for me to be able to tell like how much of it was just footage from A New Hope, how much of it, if any, was recreated through CGI. But when it's just quick shots of them in the space battle like that, I think that was a perfect way to to reuse old actors like that.
I think it was alternate takes apparently, and and maybe a few exact takes. It's hard to tell. I mean, they are just moving their head side to side in a cockpit. It's hard to tell exactly which one was brand new, which one was recycled.
Gold Leader said something like, we're starting our attack run now or something as they're about to go try to take out the shield. I was like, I think that was straight out of A New Hope, but it was cool, cool regardless.
Yeah, so I guess before we start wrapping up here, we should get to our favorite moments and the moment of the movie.
Well, I'm interested, curious though, Tim. Like maybe we should talk about our least favorite moments first, and then end on the high notes. Just because I know you had some gripes with it that I was curious to hear what you thought.
Yeah, I did. There was some stuff that kept it for me truly loving it and thinking that it's just so great. Like I know a lot of people have, and to me, at first, it was in the beginning. I felt the pacing was a little off. It was almost like there was cutting to too many different scenes too fast. But once they got to Jeddah, it was pretty much smooth sailing from there as far as the pacing. So that was one little minor gripe. But my biggest one has to be the stuff. It ties into two different things. I felt the battle on Scarif, the surface battle, was built up a little bit too much for me as far as being the greatest like Star Wars action sequence that we've ever seen. Like, I've seen that reaction from a few people before I saw it, so maybe it's my fault for getting myself too hyped up for that. But I didn't felt that quite lived up to its reputation it was getting, because I felt there's some better battle sequence and displays of wars in some Clone Wars episodes, like landing at Point Rain or Darkness on Umbara. And it was still cool. Don't get me wrong, but I just thought maybe I had my expectations a little too high for that. And part of that is because there was so much cut from the trailers, and especially on Scarif. I mean, the whole sequence of Jyn, Cassian, and K2SO running out of the Imperial bunker and into the beach with the walker shooting at him, that was nowhere in the movie. And I think that probably played into some reshoots or rewrites of how they wanted the final act to be. But I felt if we got that, and we've even seen in the behind-the-scenes footage of Cassian going into one of the trenches, just shooting his blaster, like stuff like that, we got a little bit, but I was hoping for more, especially because since we've seen it, we were teased about that. And when it wasn't there, couldn't help feel a little disappointed with how the Scarif surface battle played out. But again, this is stuff that I actually think it will get better on multiple viewings, because I'll get used to, my expectations we put aside. I'll see it more, get more familiar, and just accept how it is. But as of right now, it can help be a little bit let down with that. Just the surface battle, because the space battle was pretty awesome. So those were some of my complaints. And another thing, and this maybe going into it, it was one of those things of, just how it was paced at the beginning or just how it flowed. I just wanted more of these characters, because as we talked about in the beginning, they were great characters, but I just didn't feel the same way I felt with them with Rey, Finn, and Kylo Ren in The Force Awakens as new characters. They were good, but maybe if we just got a little more scenes or moments with them that could have helped build their relationships and their coming together for the cause. And it had those, but for just some reason, I thought it could have used a little extra more. So with that, maybe it'll flow better once I see it again, knowing what it's about now. So that could change. But those were my initial complaints, I guess, that I had walking out of it, where it just didn't hit the mark as far as being truly great and me loving it. So maybe it's just me and my expectations, but feeling that way once, I kind of reflected back and digested everything I got. So
yeah, I will say once again, I almost kind of feel the opposite of you, just in terms of the land battle and the space battle. Not that the space battle wasn't great, but I was kind of hoping, I had my expectations built up like this could be the greatest space battle we've ever seen in Star Wars. And it was great. Don't get me wrong. I think the one thing it was missing, and I wouldn't call this a complaint or a criticism necessarily, because it was just the way the story was set up. So I don't know that there's anything they could have done differently. It was just we didn't really have a hero to root for in the space battle, you know, like it, because in Return of the Jedi, when you've got the 3 battles going on at once, you've got the you know, the ground battle on Endor, and then the space battle, and then the you know, the confrontation in the Emperor's throne room. Obviously, it's like in the throne room you're clearly rooting for Luke, on the ground you're clearly rooting for Han and Leia and Chewie, and in space you're clearly rooting for Lando and the Millennium Falcon. And we didn't really have like that hero ship that we were following sort of in this space battle. It was just kind of all these random, you know, red leader, blue leader, gold leader, general so-and-so, admiral, you know, fat Mon Calamari guy.
I think his name is Radis.
Yeah, Radis. Just all kind of doing their thing. And it was awesome, you know, for what it was. Just the action and the scenery of all of it was amazing. It was just, I felt like that was the one piece missing from it, was like a Luke or a Poe Dameron type hero character that actually had like an objective to accomplish in that space battle. But then as far as the ground battle goes, I mean, just as in terms of the action, yeah, I thought that was, you know, maybe not in terms of scale, like as big as I thought it would be. It wasn't quite, you know, Hoth or Geonosis in terms of like the overall scale of the battle, but in terms of the intensity and feeling like you were right there in the middle of, you know, these intense shootouts between rebels and stormtroopers. I think that was maybe some of the best, just like gunfight action that we've gotten in any Star Wars movie so far. But I guess if anything, my gripes with the ground battle were just based on like some of the little objectives and stuff they had to accomplish were like a little hard for me to follow, especially Bodhi when he was, what was he doing when he had to like, you know, like run a cable out from the ship or something? Oh, yeah. And it was like, you guys go over here and flip this switch, so I'm going to go plug over here and flip this switch and then come back to the ship and flip this switch so that we can send a transmission to the fleet to tell them to knock out the shield so we can send another transmission to the fleet. And it just got a little convoluted for me.
It reminded me of Back to the Future if Doc Brown was being shot at while trying to do the cord back and forth. That's what it reminded me. He's like,
yeah. And it was just like, I mean, that felt like stuff that they maybe added in reshoots to just sort of flesh it out a little bit and be like, oh, we need more specific objectives here, so it's not just random, you know, rebels and stormtroopers shooting at each other. But I mean, I don't know if it was stuff they added after the fact or if it was just that way from the beginning, but some of that just was, you know, threw me off a little bit. Other than that, just, I mean, it was pretty much just that and CGI Tarkin. And I mean, I might have had some other, you know, small little gripes with it along the way, but I can't really think of them as of now. Oh, you know what? Here's a plot hole though that I realized earlier as I was reading something about, you know, the cameos and stuff. Because this was a fun little cameo when they're on Jeddah and they run into Ponda Baba and Dr. Evazan. Yeah. I was like, okay, that was kind of fun to see. And then I was like, wait, hang on a second. It's kind of convenient timing if, you know, Jin and Cassian just happened to bump into them as they were on their way to their spaceship about to leave Jeddah for Tatooine. Yeah. But otherwise, wouldn't they have gotten wiped out right there by the Death Star?
Yeah. Like, how'd they get off that?
Yeah. I mean, they could have gotten off. Again, it's just very convenient that, like, they happened to be just about to leave right when all this was going to go down.
Yeah, that was I love that moment, and at the same moment, it was like, you know, there's kind of that was. I'm glad they put that part in. It was a little bit fan service right there, but knowing Dr. Evazan and Ponda Baba, they probably, you know, after they got out of there, they probably took credit for the whole place exploding themselves. Like, oh yeah, we did that.
Probably.
Yeah. So,
I'm sure it was one of the systems he had a death sentence on. Too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe it used to be 13 and now it's only 12 because Jedda's
gone. You know, Kyle, I disagree with you know, the battle at the end for me. While it definitely wasn't, you know, the biggest best space battle, I appreciated and really did feel the similarity between Return of the Jedi and Rogue One, because yeah, we had the space battle, and for me, I was rooting in the space instead of Lando or whatever. I was really rooting. It was a weird blend because you were rooting for Bodhi to get the plans to Winston Churchill, Mon Calamari guy. So that was the guy I was rooting for because that was like the target, right? And then you just had to and it had those really moments that you'd never seen in any other previous space battles before, with the Hammerhead kamikaze mission right there of,
which was
bashing
also
one
cool
star.
to see them bring that in from Rebels.
Yeah,
and to not have and to not just have that ship be like a cameo in the background, but to have it actually serve a purpose in the forefront of the battle there.
That was visually that was awesome.
Yeah, and not to say like use the ships that Princess Leia got from the rebels of the they didn't say that. They just kind of did it, and if you knew what it was from, you knew it was from. But to see that moment, like we've seen Star Destroyers hit one another in Empire and everything, but never one shave the top of the other one off, and it was just awesome. and then right at the end, you're like, okay, everyone, let's get to hyperspace and get out of here. And right when they hit hyperspace, the other Star Destroyers come out
that was.
Whoosh, and then see the Imperial transport.
I was like, they're not all getting out of it that easy, right?
No.
I was like, nope.
Well, especially because Tarkin had said, prepare the Death Star for hyperspace and alert Lord Vader, and so you knew like Vader was gonna show up at some point, and I was like, is he gonna do his TIE fighter thing again like he did in Rebels or something? Like I wasn't sure what to expect, but. And again, I mean, I'm not saying the space battle wasn't awesome because it was. I'm just saying that was the one thing that kept it, probably the only thing that kept it from becoming my new favorite space battle was just the fact that, as much as there was some really cool stuff going on, just there wasn't as much of sort of a dramatic storyline like within that space battle itself, or like, a character that I really cared that deeply about.
Yeah. Well, there was a time clock. It had elements of A New Hope and Return of the Jedi in that, because the pacing at the end, the last battles, you go up, there's a battle down here, there's a battle over, there's a personal battle going on, and then there's a battle up in the sky, and they're all the clock is ticking, because that especially towards the end that Scarif is Scarif is gonna partially blow up, and so again, it took elements from Star Wars. I mean, we in the New Hope, we know the clock is ticking down because we saw what happened to Alderaan, and in this case we're counting down because we saw what happened to Jeddah. So I mean,
and at the same time, I appreciated that there wasn't an actual ticking clock.
Yes,
that gets kind of cliche to me. I mean, I don't mind it in A New Hope so much, but that is one thing that kind of bugs me in The Force Awakens when they're back at the Resistance base, like as Poe and the X-Wings are fighting at Starkiller Base, and C-3PO is like, and their weapon will be ready to fire in 15 minutes. I'm like, how the heck do you know that? You're halfway across the galaxy. And even if you had a way to calculate that, like, just knowing that they're about to fire the weapon, like we can see the energy getting siphoned off from the sun, and you see it getting darker and darker and the sun getting smaller and smaller. That's the ticking clock. We don't need to put an actual number on it. So shut up, 3PO.
Yeah, pretty much.
So yeah, okay. We've talked how excited we were, how we felt after the movie was ended. Let's talk about that moment now, because I'm sure we all have different favorite moments, but this is the moment of the movie, which I'm sure is everyone's favorite.
Yeah, that final moment with Vader. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I need to go see the movie again. Like, because on the one hand, I'm thinking it would be worth the price of admission just to, like, I would buy a ticket and go in just to see the last 5 minutes of the movie. It would be worth it. But at the same time, I'm like, I almost feel like I need to reprocess everything else that happened in the movie, because it was like all of that went out the window in the last 5 minutes. Like, I walked out of the theater, and if you had said, what was Rogue One about? I would have been like, well, Darth Vader killed some rebels, and it was awesome.
Like I said, the complaints I had were, I wasn't thinking about those during that moment. Like, when the movie ended, it was all about that amazing Darth Vader sequence, and
I mean, just
stuff that was hyped up and like the reactions from the premiere and stuff, people said the Vader stuff was awesome, and I was getting myself hyped up for it too. And that could have backfired on me like it did the service battle on Scarif, but this exceeded anything I expected to happen.
I
It was
will
just
say,
so awesome to see Vader like this.
I kind of wish I hadn't read like some of the reactions that I did after the premiere. Because I didn't have this moment spoiled for me necessarily, but I heard people say, you know, oh, there's one really awesome moment with Vader, and it's like something straight out of a horror movie. And so, you know, when I was thinking like, well, that could kind of be just like his castle on Mustafar, and then how he's in the Bacta tank, and then he comes out of the smoke walking towards Krennic. But I'm like, that wasn't that terrifying. So I don't know what's going to happen here, but there's got to be something else with Vader at the end, doesn't there? So I kind of wish I hadn't been expecting that. Like, you know, even though Tarkin says like alert Vader, I would have just been thinking like, oh, well, maybe Vader shows up, or maybe he just goes after, you know, Leia as she's leaving the battle, and that ties into A New Hope or something. Like that could have been fine. I mean, let's be honest. Like, and Tim, this is what I had been talking about, you know, on our episodes, like sort of the exact way that I was predicting that the movie would end would just be Jyn beaming up the Death Star plans from the surface of Scarif and being beamed straight to the Tantive 4, and then Leia just booking it, like while the battle is still going, and these guys, you know, the rest of the Rebel fleet being like, we'll cover your retreat, you get out of here with these plans. And I, you know, I would have been fine with that. Like this moment at the end, it almost was like gratuitous fan service in a sense, but it was
but I don't care.
Yeah, no, it was like, I'll have to go see it, you know, multiple more times and sort of analyze this. But, you know, this is, I mean, the fight between Luke and Vader in Return of the Jedi will probably always be my favorite Vader moment because of the dramatic weight that scene carries, and, you know, of course, his redemption and everything. But as far as just action moments and moments of Darth Vader just being pure awesome and a sheer force to be reckoned with, like, this has got to be top of the list, where you know, he obviously, like we said, the rebels are starting to retreat from the space battle. They're like, okay, we've got the plans, let's get out of here. And a couple of them jump to hyperspace, and then Darth Vader's big freaking Star Destroyer just jumps into the middle of them, and you actually see one ship just like crash into it, and you know, and it's like a big transport ship too, and this Star Destroyer just makes it look tiny, and you're like, whoop, there went those guys. And then, you know, I think they disable the big, you know, command ship where Admiral Raddus is, and then Vader's like, okay, prepare to board. But he just goes in by himself, and they've like shut down the power to the ship, and so it's like just this dark hallway, and you see these rebel guys, they like download the plans onto a disc, and they're scrambling and like, okay, come on, let's get out of here. And Vader, you know, busts into the ship, and you just see in this dark hallway just the red lightsaber blade ignite, and all these terrified rebel soldiers, and he just goes to town on them. And, you know, again, it's like, you know, they're trapped in this hallway with a door that's jammed, and, you know, as they're trying to fire back and desperately try to get this door open, Vader's just cutting them down left and right, force choking them, flinging them across the room. It felt like being the hero in Battlefront. Except I'm never that awesome with Vader, but I've fought people who are. And, you know, when you and your squad like come around a hallway in, you know, the Hoth base or whatever, and Vader's there, and he just starts, you know, throwing his lightsaber and whatever, and just cutting you guys down left and right. Like, that's kind of what it felt like. But it was just so well done. I mean, it was awesome. It was terrifying. It was well choreographed. And this particularly is the scene that I said made me feel like it perfectly bridged the gap between Anakin in Revenge of the Sith and Vader in A New Hope. Because, you know, he was still like moving slowly. He wasn't doing any like Yoda kind of flips or anything. You know, it was like he didn't do anything that Anakin could do that Vader couldn't do, if that made sense. But at the same time, he was far more, you know, fast and agile and deadly than we've ever seen Vader before, but it didn't feel impossible. It didn't feel out of character, but just the speed.
No, yeah, because the way he was swinging and flipping his lightsaber.
Yeah.
But it totally fit, you know, that he could still do that despite being more machine than man now. It totally felt like showing Darth Vader's power, but yet not overdoing it to make it like, how come he didn't do that with Obi-Wan in A New Hope? A totally different scenario with deflecting blasters and everything. It was just perfect.
Exactly. Yeah. And again, it was to the point where like it's a little bit more intense than, you know, his fight with Obi-Wan, but knowing that they made A New Hope, you know, almost 40 years ago now, like it was a small enough gap that I'm like, I can forgive that. It wasn't him doing anything that seems completely out of the realm of possibility of Vader doing. But at the same time, I was like, that feels like Anakin in the Vader suit right now. Like that feels like him, you know, going on a rampage through the Jedi Temple or through the Separatist base on Mustafar. You know, just the way he moves and is easily deflecting those blaster bolts and cutting people down and stuff. I'm like, oh, this is our reminder that like Darth Vader used to be the most powerful Jedi in the galaxy, and he's still got it. Like, it was so incredible.
Now, did he? I was listening to Jason and Carl in the Wampa's lair today, and they had mentioned something that I thought I saw as well in that fight. Did he? We all know he grabbed all the blasters out of their hands all at once, which was amazing. But did he not only block a blaster bolt with his hand, but then throw it back at somebody?
Yes, he did.
Oh, did he? I didn't.
It was real quick, but you could definitely tell. Like he moved his hand, and then you see a person get blasted. Like it wasn't just a normal force push. You definitely saw where that person got hit.
Yeah, he actually caught the blaster bolt, or at least stopped it in midair, but then threw it back at him or somehow. So
that little shade of Kylo Ren there.
Yeah, I mean it makes sense because I mean, you know, it would be one thing if he caught it and froze it in midair like Kylo did, but yeah, you got to think like if it's flying at him and he deflects it, like it's got to go somewhere. The energy doesn't just, you know, automatically dissipate.
Yeah. So
yeah, man,
it's gonna be a scene that you as soon as it comes out on Blu-ray, I'll be you know, doing a nice stop motion, you know, pause, you know, for each little frame.
The one other thing that I thought I caught, but you know, it was all happening so fast. I was like, I'm not sure if this is exactly what happened, but you know, there's the one rebel that he like grabs with the force and like pins him to the ceiling. Yes. And then he walks under him, like still swinging his lightsaber. And I think he either like swings his lightsaber to deflect a blaster bolt and in the same motion just like slashes the guy in half behind him, or he deflects the blaster bolt so that it hits the guy as he's still like hanging from the ceiling.
Yeah. I think the lightsaber got him. That's what it looked like to me.
That's what it looked like. But again, it was all happening so fast. I was like, you know, I didn't see him slash the guy. I just saw like, oh, that guy is still hanging up there, but now he looks like he's got a lightsaber cut through him.
Yeah.
And even after all that awesomeness, probably my favorite shot of the whole movie is just him seeing the Tantive 4 escape. You just see him looking out into space against the ruins of that ship and the stormtroopers behind him, and just as he, you know, powers down his lightsaber. I just love that shot visually. It's like something you would see in like a CG cutscene for a video game, or just really good like fan-made wallpaper or something. It's just, I want that as my desktop screen. If there was something that's going to replace all my Death Trooper wallpaper, it's going to be that shot of Vader and the stormtroopers. It was just so good. And then
and then even the reveal that the Tantive 4 was like docked with that with that cruiser, because again, having to kind of reconcile like things that are already in place in A New Hope, like Vader says something about you know, several transmissions were beamed to this ship by rebel spies. I want to know what happened to the plans they sent you. And so it's like the plans weren't beamed directly to the Tantive 4, but the Tantive 4 was like connected to the ship that they were beamed to. So it still kind of worked out. And at the same time, they still got to let Vader go on a killing spree through the ship without, you know, killing everyone on the Tantive 4 and completely wrecking the cannon. So, you know.
Yeah. And then for like when episode 4 begins, like, you know, we got it caught in the tractor beam. They're not going anywhere. The stormtroopers, you go clear them out first. I did my part.
Yeah, exactly.
But talking about how the movie ends too, where this perfectly led up into A New Hope. I mean, I think everyone probably had the same feeling where as soon as it ends, you just want to pop in A New Hope on Blu-ray and just watch that. And I've heard reports and kind of some casting listing that she was going to be in it, but how great it was it to have it end on Princess Leia saying the line, it gives us hope. And then you just see it going, the Tantive4 going to hyperspace. So it's just perfect. Like, you just almost want to see, once it comes out on Blu-ray, have someone edit together that shot of it flying away and Rogue One ends, but then before the credits roll, you just seamlessly transition it to the beginning of A New Hope as you see it flying over Tatooine. It was just a perfect lead up into that. I mean, I couldn't ask for a better ending, really.
Yeah, no, it was. Yeah, excellent. I wasn't even expecting. I mean, I was kind of expecting Leia, but to just have that line in there where they say, what have they brought us? And she says, hope. And you could tell they cut the audio of that right from, help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only. Oh, we'll take this end part right here, stick it in here.
Yeah.
And I mean, again, with the CGI, I thought it was a little better there because, because it was just such a brief, quick cameo. But I still I wouldn't have minded if we just saw her from behind and heard the voice. Like, that still would have been fine to me. And so the CGI, like, it wasn't bad necessarily, but at the same time, and it was such a close up too. I was like, do we need to go this far with it? Not necessarily, but I'm not complaining really. But more like just the context of the scene I really liked, with just her one line there and sort of the way that it ended on, on a more hopeful note right after that Vader massacre, because it could have just been like, oh, phew, we made it to the Tantive4, jump to hyperspace, and, it ends. And, we still know what's going to happen next. And, it's kind of hopeful for us just because we still know that the rebels are going to win in the end and they're going to blow up the Death Star. But it was a nice little way to fit her in there, and to, after watching all the main characters in the movie get killed off and then having Vader go on this rampage and massacre everybody and they barely escape, to bring it back up a notch right before the ending.
Well, the theme of hope was definitely present in that. So, with the whole line of rebellions are built on hope, and I believe it was Cassian that said that first in the movie to Jyn. Isn't that right? Yeah, and then for Jyn to repeat it when she started believing it, and and then of course to close out with Leia. But even just when we're going back to Jyn and Cassian, there's that hope that what they're doing, their sacrifice, is not going to be for naught. They're going to this means something. They're going to, her father's work is going to pay off, and so the whole movie has this sense of hope. There's sacrifices, yes, but the hope that the universe will be a better place because of the actions that we're doing. So that closing it all out was nice, even if they obviously did do the like you said, Kyle, the line just pulled from Help Me, Obi-Wan. It was still nice. I didn't mind that, though. I thought I'm just pointing out that they did that, but I'm not criticizing it. I think it was cool. Just like how in Force Awakens they pulled a snippet of Obi-Wan saying Rey. Don't be afraid.
Yeah. No, I think it's cool.
It's all connected.
So.
Yeah, just really cool. Just makes Star Wars great. Just when you get new stories like this, it just makes you appreciate the stories we've got and just the history of these certain characters with Darth Vader. Seeing him do that awesome stuff in that action sequence there at the end of it, that knowing that's Anakin Skywalker, like you said, Kyle, from the Clone Wars and all the great moments he had there. And it's just so cool to have all this history and backstory with some of these characters in Star Wars. And now we got that for A New Hope. When we read the opening lines in the crawl and hear certain dialogue in the beginning, we can now remember the characters of Rogue One and their sacrifice and what they went to get the Death Star planned. And I kind of like it too. They didn't say this in the movie, but when they kind of were recognized as their call sign was Rogue One, and even the Rebel transport or Admiral Raddus was referring to them as Rogue One, and kind of like as an honor for what they did, they named Rogue Squadron after them, which I think it's safe to assume. So cool little stuff like that, more universe building is just so good. So it really delivered on a lot of fronts. But I guess to wrap it up, I guess want to give final thoughts on the movie. And now I have to say, even just talking about it is making me feel better about some of the issues I'd had with it. I'm just itching to see it again. So what are your guys' final thoughts on Rogue One? Start with you, Joey.
I loved it. I'm telling all the people at my school to go out and go to it. I know the school secretaries all ask, "What was your? Do you like it? Do you like it?" And I said yes. And it's a great movie. It's not just a great Star Wars film, but it's just a great movie. I really think that I'm hoping that this hope. No, I'm hoping that this film appeals not just to Star Wars fans, but really just to anybody who just likes a good movie in general, because you don't necessarily need to know anything about Star Wars. You know, if you know who Darth Vader is, that's pretty much all you need to know for this film. And just go in and have fun with it. And yeah, I'm curious. I'll be curious to see how it does over the next few weeks. Because I know it's going to have obviously a great opening weekend, but just to see how the word of mouth continues to spread, and if it can go to those folks out there that aren't even Star Wars fans. That's where it's really going to get its legs. And yeah, I don't think it's going to be as big as Force Awakens, because what will be, it's not. I'm not going to get into that thing, that trap, because I tried that back in the prequels when I'm like, well, Attack of the Clones will get bigger box office than Phantom Menace. Oh, okay, that won't happen. But okay, Revenge of the Sith, it wouldn't happen. So I'm not gonna get into that. I'm just hoping that it appeals to a big base of moviegoers, because I think the movie deserves it.
Yeah.
You go.
Yeah, I think I was very happy with it. I think it was successful as just doing what it set out to do, and being the first of these Star Wars spin-off films. And we didn't even really talk that much about sort of the different just sort of tone and feel that this one had, but I think it succeeded in feeling like Star Wars, while at the same time feeling different enough that you can tell that this isn't one of the main episode movies. From sort of the more grounded and gritty feel that it had, to even some of the more kind of like violent and intense action, to again, like I said, just some of the shots of like the rebels and stormtroopers like shooting at each other on Scarif was just kind of more focused and intense on like the actual people getting killed in the battle than we've usually seen before. Usually it's just big wide shots of blaster bolts flying and stormtroopers getting hit with Ewok rocks, and everybody's having a good time, like but yeah, but at the same time, and we didn't even talk about the music either, but I thought Michael Giacchino did a great job of kind of that same thing, just blending the old and the new, like making it, coming up with something new, but making it feel familiar enough that it doesn't pull you out. It doesn't feel like, a totally different movie that's supposed to still be in the Star Wars universe. It felt different enough, but connected enough. So I thought it was, successful there. Had some great moments, great characters, great acting and script and everything. And, like we said, maybe some minor gripes as far as certain story things or way that, they pulled off certain effects. But for the most part, everything was fantastic. And at the end of the day, even if the rest of the movie was terrible, like Jin could have been boring and Cassian could have been ugly and the plot could have been all messy and confusing, and I still would have been happy for that last scene with Vader. Like seriously, that was one of the greatest Star Wars moments ever. But I feel like the whole thing as a whole was pretty successful.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I didn't come out loving it, as I know a lot of people did after they first saw it, saying it's one of the top favorite Star Wars movie. It's not up there for me just yet, but again, it did what it was supposed to do as far as telling a new Star Wars story outside of the Skywalker saga, and it did that really successfully. And like you said, Kyle, there's some truly the great Star Wars moments ever in this movie. So it's always going to have that, despite what issues some people might have, and it's always going to have that for its claim to fame if you were not too happy with the main story of it. So, but again, I think it delivered pretty much on what it was setting out to do. So yeah, Rogue One I think we could say, is officially a win for Lucasfilm and this new era of Star Wars where we're going to get a movie each year. So hopefully, like you were pointing out, Joey, the general audience reacts to it pretty positively too. So Lucasfilm and Disney can be happy and just continue to do these new Star Wars stories and venture out into the more traditional Star Wars stuff we're used to. So
I just hope the general audience
definitely one on that front.
I just hope the general audiences don't get confused by all the jumping around the timeline. Like I was talking to my boss about it today, who, you know, he's not really a Star Wars fan, but I think he's seen all of them like at least once. And, you know, he's been aware of Rogue One coming out and we've talked about it and stuff. But I was explaining to him today that this one, you know, is the story of how the rebels steal the Death Star plans. Because I mean, one of his biggest gripes with The Force Awakens, like he wasn't crazy about it, and he thought it was kind of a rehash of, you know, of the originals, and that it felt really familiar and stuff. And I told him, I was like, well, you might like this one because, you know, it does feel kind of new, but there's also a lot of stuff that feels really familiar, but like it's supposed to, because it's set right in the same time period. Like if it feels exactly like A New Hope, it's because it's set right before A New Hope, and it's, you know, the rebels stealing the Death Star plans. He's like, oh, really? I didn't know that. Like I thought it was, you know, right after episode 7. I was like, no, that's episode 8 that comes out next year. And he's like, oh, how are you supposed to keep all these straight? Like, you know, we the fans put in the effort. Like we read about these and know what's going on where, but for casual audiences, we're like, oh, there's a new Star Wars movie out. I like Star Wars. Let's go see that. They might end up being really confused by all these spin-offs, but, you know, hopefully they'll catch on to what's going on.
Hopefully enough either doesn't bother them, or they realize where it takes place, where you know, it doesn't really affect box office numbers.
Yeah. See, that's the one reason why I wish this movie had a crawl at the beginning. Like I like that it. I do kind of like that it didn't, just because I like that it's different. And, you know, again, that's a way that you can tell, like, oh, this isn't episode 8 because there wasn't the crawl saying it's episode 8. But at the same time, it's like for those people that aren't as hardcore fans, it maybe would have been nice to have something establishing when this does take place. Without being like, you know, 1 BBY, because that wouldn't help them out either.
Now you're getting really hardcore with that terminology for the years. So I guess that's going to wrap up our spoiler cast for Rogue One. Thank you for those who watched this live and later on. Hope you enjoyed our discussion of it, and definitely, hopefully you watched it before you saw, or after you saw the movie, because definitely don't want to get spoiled on all the awesome stuff that happened in Rogue One.
If you did that, write me and tell me, because I want to know you. You're a weirdo.
Okay. Yeah, like I'd almost feel bad for spoiling it for you, but you did this to yourself.
Yeah, I don't feel bad at all. You're a weirdo. Get away from me.
Well, Joey, thanks for joining us. But if there was anyone that did get spoiled by this before seeing the movie, where can they find you online to tell you why?
Yeah, you feel free to reach out to me. I host a podcast called the Animaniacast with my brother Nathan and Kelly from BigShinyRobot.com, and you can find us over at RetroZap.com and over at Twitter and Facebook and all that stuff with just Animaniacast. And if you can't figure out by the name right there, we talk about every episode of the Animaniacs. So, and don't worry, Tim can vouch for this. We talk about Star Wars in just about every episode.
That is
true. Conversations usually go to Star Wars and definitely Steven Spielberg films quite often. So even if you're not the hugest fan of Animaniacs, give us a listen. I think you'll like what you hear. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely check it out. It's really good, especially for Animaniacs fans. You guys do an awesome job of breaking down the episode and just bringing out the references and historical aspects of it that I never knew about. It's just good to get that, where they get their inspiration from. So
Tim was our first verified iTunes user review, other than me and my brother, I think. So thank you, Tim, for being the first listener iTunes reviewer. So yes, thank you.
You're quite welcome.
And thanks for letting me on tonight. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, thanks for being here.
Yeah, definitely. And Kyle, do you want to give our show's information out where they can find us?
Sure. Yeah. If you guys want to hear Tim and I ramble on for even longer than this, talking about all things Star Wars, and especially, you know, all the new movies, man, I'm gonna have to switch up our intro again now, because now we're gonna be talking about episode 8, and I'm gonna be like all the new info on Rogue One, and wait, that's out already. But anyway, yeah, we talk a lot about we started talking about The Force Awakens, and now Rogue One, and now we'll be on to talking about episode 8 and Han Solo and all the other fun stuff coming up. So we're over on Star Wars The Saga Continues, and you can find us on there at StarWarsTSC.com. You can follow us on Twitter at Star Wars TSC, and you can find us on Facebook. Just search for Star Wars: The Saga Continues, and you can send us email at starwarstsc@gmail.com, and we'll be recording a separate episode for that within the next couple days or so here. So if any of you want to share your thoughts with us about Rogue One and what you thought about the story, the characters, the Vader moments, CGI Tarkin, anything like that, go ahead and shoot us an email or tweet us or anything like that, and we'll have an awesome time talking on there. That will probably go like 3 hours or something.
Easily.
we're already at like 2.5 for this one, and I can already think of at least a couple other things for Rogue One that we haven't talked about that I kind of want to mention, but I will save those for later just for the sake of getting out of here in a timely fashion.
Yeah, so, and of course, we're part of the ThunderQuack podcast network, and you can find our show and all the other ThunderQuack podcasts at ThunderQuack.com, and you can help support us and all the other shows part of the network at Patreon.com/ThunderQuack if you enjoy it and enjoyed our discussions on Rogue One and all the other podcasts and their topics that they talk about. So with that, thanks again, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Take it easy.
And may the Force be with you.
The whole